Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The mayor has called the meeting to order. Vice Mayor Kaplan,
Here.
Councilmember De La Cruz,
Here.
Councilmember Gross,
Here.
Mayor Lindsay,
Here.
Councilmember McCormick,
Here.
Councilmember Moss,
Here.
and Councilmember Petros.
Here.
We do have a quorum, Mayor. If we may please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ms. McCormick? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item, Mayor, is brief comments by council.
Yes, please.
I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to our colleague on the Miami-Dade County Commission, Xavier Suarez, who went to bat for us this week and helped us out tremendously with an issue that arose at the Crandon Fields. And this is the kind of coordination and cooperation that I think we need to continue to foster between the City of Miami, Miami-Dade County, and the Village of Key Biscayne. So thank you, Commissioner Suarez, and let's keep working.
Brett.
I would like to also give a shout out to my son who turned 4 today. And I just want to say happy birthday. And I know he's watching it right now. So happy birthday, Leandro.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
I'd like to say congratulations to our new old police chief. We're glad you're still sitting back there.
In a different seat.
Never left.
Very different.
Yes, Katie.
I would also like to say thank you to the police and the code compliance for doing a great job in acting the banning of the gas-powered leaf blowers. I've heard from numerous people that they've been very happy in the community, and it's made a pretty immediate impact, so thank you.
And I would like to extend a welcome to our representative, Nick Duran, who is here, who's been working incredibly hard this session and every session. We're glad you are here and working for us and responsive, and thank you.
With that said,
Representative Duran, if you could please come up for your legislative update.
Great. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayors, Council members. It's good to be with you this evening. Good to come in, and good evening to the residents as well. It's good to be here. So I wanted to take a few minutes. I know you have a packed agenda, but wanted to make sure I came by, said hello, and gave you a few updates, I think, on some priority items. I think your legislative consultants who that represent you in Tallahassee also have some details as well. So I'll do some top-line skimming on some things I think are important. You know, last year we had found some success with individual funding projects that we were able to bring the traffic signalization and the Key Biscayne Nature Center, some funding to both of those items, important. This was a very unique session. I think what you saw in the last 2 weeks is that because of what had happened at Parkland, the tragedy and the shooting and what we were dealing with and focusing in on that, a lot of funding efforts and focus went towards the need to fund the public safety and school safety priorities in that budget. A lot of local funding projects then fell off the list and really sort of had to reallocate the entire budget in that sense. So unfortunately, we were able to walk away with a couple of these projects. Another thing is water projects alone. If you look at those 70% reduction in our water projects across the state, I'll say this, any water project that has been secured or was secured in the budget by a Democrat was probably vetoed and most likely vetoed in the government. That's the way it works. When the Republicans control all three. But that's the way it is, and we'll continue to move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about upcoming elections, what I see as the trends are going forward. I want to talk a little bit about beach renourishment. there was $60 million allocated for beach renourishment. I think there were some tweaks in the budget language. On page 243 of the very big 400-plus page budget, there were some revisions to two particular places. One, the removal of that prohibition that you can only fund projects between the first rankings 1 through 20. I know Key Biscayne has been historically ranked number 21. And this year, because of that change, because of the change related to the inlet language as well, that Key Biscayne is now going to be up for about $990,000 for beach renourishment program, programming funding. So that's at least a good highlight. I think that's important to talk about. Some local rule issues. Obviously, we always want to know where they're going. We have an appetite, and I guess there's an appetite by the leadership in the House to whack away at home rule. That includes your Airbnb legislation, your red light legislation, your bike sharing. These are issues that I think have been discussed heavily and mainly discussed on a local level. The state decided to try to take over, and all of those ended up failing in the legislature before they were able to pass. So those are no longer, won't be the law, and those are, I would say, and you expect the same sort of philosophy in the House is something to really do consider.
We wish you continuing failure.
Now, and that leads me to my next piece, which is sort of the upcoming elections. I think what you're seeing, what you could potentially see is this: the House will probably continue to have a Republican control, a majority. There is a lot of what I think is fluidity in terms of who might be the governor, Democrat or Republican, if it's a Democratic governor. And more importantly, I think when you look at the Senate right now, it's a 24-16. With the upcoming elections, there's a possibility that it may be closer to a 2019 or something even closer. And so when the Senate looks like that, it's up for grabs in terms of whose Senate it is. But also it creates this leverage point where things like these kind of troubling local home rule type of legislations continue to find their end in the legislature before they even meet to the governor's desk for a signing. So those are some of the more touch points I wanted to kind of bring to you. Obviously, there's more to talk about. We had a big public safety bill that was passed that included a handful of gun regulation, new gun regulations that haven't been put into place in 20-plus years. Representative Moskowitz is actually one of the leaders in making sure that happened and that we actually did something this go around in that vein. But to that extent, I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to continue to reach out to each of you. I've been working with several of folks on some issues related to FPL and other issues that I think are important for you all. But here and excited to be with you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Next item, Mayor, is a legislative presentation by Fausto Gomez.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
The last meeting, we mentioned that we might consider allowing public comments before the presentations. And there's a lot of people here, I think.
I would be glad to if everyone is good with amending our agenda.
Sure.
We have consensus.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
And we will resume after with our special presentations when we are done with our public comments. Our first speaker is Raul Llorente.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mayor and council members, village manager, village attorney. To be brief, I'll read from my notes. Mayor, 3 minutes.
241.
In 1993, 25 years ago, I was a village council member. In the good company of Mayor John Festa and council members Betty Sim, Mort Freed, Ray Sullivan, and Joe Rasco, we did our best to make positive decisions. To mention one, our first village manager, Sam Kissinger, suggested we could finance the purchase of the village green, and we all agreed. I learned how efficient our government functions when the entire council considers practical suggestions. Tonight, I wish to speak about our fellow Key Biscayner, Joe Rasco, who I firmly believe would do a great job as our next village manager. Allow me to outline important facts. Joe has been a permanent Key Biscayne resident for 40 years, one of the visionaries who worked hard to establish our local government. Joe was elected to our council in 1991. Sam Kissinger was appointed in 1992 when we needed him because we did not have historic experience. Now we have. Joe worked with Sam Kissinger to prepare goals and objective sessions Mr. Kissinger proposed to organize our community. Joe Rasco understood very well the managerial expertise of Mr. Kissinger. Joe was elected our mayor in 1998 until 2002. He worked with Sam Kissinger to complete important village buildings. Former Mayor Rasco has full understanding of the managerial skills required to help our council turn into reality projects we need. Let's be appreciative of Joe Rasco's impressive record of service and recognize his capabilities as village managers to assist our council to solidify our Key Biscayne principles and traditions. We Key Biscayners are always proud of the success of our village government, and Joe Rasco is now willing to show that he has learned plenty in 27 years to help Key Biscayne continue our success. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Our next speaker is Clifford Brody.
Starting to smell like mothballs in here. Clifford Brody, 613 Ocean Drive. I wanted to speak to you in regard to item 10A14, a proposed letter to the head of the County Library District from Vice Mayor Kaplan, urging the county to respond to a village request to develop together a new library. I urge the council to wholeheartedly support the letter. This issue has a history that goes all the way back to when we were first incorporated in 1991, 27 years ago. Even back then, our first council, of which I was a member, recognized the small county branch library was inadequate for our needs and very expensive for taxpayers. Today, the branch library is almost the same as it was then, while the field of library science has moved into modern technology age and has expanded the mission for quality libraries. Meanwhile, as our property values have increased, the cost of our current library has risen to an incredible $2.4 million a year. That's over $200,000 a month. Clearly, something needs to be done. It would be a fair question to ask why wasn't something done sooner. The first council recognized this problem, but it was so occupied with just forming a government, starting a fire department, police department, 100 other tasks, it was put on the back burner. Then along came Hurricane Andrew, and another 3 years went by with the council occupied with hurricane recovery. Then there were extended problems acquiring 530 Crandon, the once planned location for the library, including a cultural center, and then more years went by waiting for the environmental damage there to be cleaned up. Then the council decided 530 was not a good location and the property should be used for more green space, a decision I personally have no problem with. That pretty much brings us up to today. Now the county, at least at the library district level, has shown some willingness to address our issue. Research has shown if we cannot reach an agreement that makes sense with the county, it might be possible to move forward with the municipal system through one of three different options: a department of the village, an independent library district, or a dependent library district. All three structures are authorized by state law. But none of that is for tonight. The first step is to try and work out something with the county, and to that end, a proposal to the county was submitted by Vice Mayor Kaplan back in October of last year, about 6 months ago. To date, the county has not responded to that proposal. Meanwhile, the village taxpayers burn through $200,000 a month waiting for a reply. Clearly an unacceptable situation. The proposed letter in 10A14 is an attempt to get the county moving. It needs the council's full support to help get the county's attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
3 seconds to go.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Peter Warner.
Peter Warner, longtime resident of Key Biscayne. Good evening, village manager and council members. The comments are about flooding. We're in April. This is supposed to be the dry season. On Sunday, I was shocked as the 2 lanes formed one at the northern end of Crandon Park due to flooding. And this is not a year, 3-year, 5-year problem. We are not going to be able to leave the island if we have continual flooding through the northern end of Crandon Park. So my comments are for the village manager and the village council members. I'm not sure which is the appropriate department at Miami-Dade County, Public Works. That needs to be accelerated, whatever plans, if there are plans to raise the causeway through Crandon Park, should be done immediately, not tomorrow. Or you're going to see property values drop, people are not going to get off the island, they're going to complain, and this has nothing to do with tropical depression, hurricane, the rainy season. It's already now. And apart from that, we're all familiar with the flooding on Key Biscayne. Also on Sunday, the last few blocks of Harbor Drive were flooded, and the streets going to the school were also badly flooded. So whatever plans there are for more wells, pumping stations, should probably also be addressed.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ignacio Segurola.
Good evening, Council. Ignacio Segurola, 81 Ocean Drive. There are 3 topics on tonight's agenda that I just want to talk about very briefly. First is the permit fees. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for the work you put into it and the attention and the debate. I think the current ordinance that you guys will discuss tonight and probably approve embodies everything we've worked on together as residents and a council over the last year. Second thing would be the hurricane debris removal. Again, I wanted to thank you for listening to our input as the condos with the form that we put forth to get this process rolling along and get everything done before the hurricane season starts. And the final thing is the Village of Key Biscayne settlement agreement that will be discussed tonight. I want to just express my personal feelings as a resident. I understand I have not been present, and the public has not been present at any of the executive sessions, and I'm sure there are many details in the litigation that we are not privy to. Taking that caveat into mind, I just wanted to express that I personally am not happy with this settlement. I don't think it's a solution to the problems that we have faced and we will face in the future. I think at best it is a stopgap measure, which could potentially end up being worse by allowing the city of Miami to solidify its position on Virginia Key and not allowing us to undo things in the future. The one thing that comes to mind is the quote-unquote temporary parking lots that were put down 2 years ago in preparation for the first boat show. We were assured that it was only going to go down for about 2 or 3 weeks, and here we are 2 years later, it is a permanent parking lot. With that in mind, those are my 2 cents. Thank you very much. I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cecile Sanchez.
Cecile Sanchez, 260 Cypress Drive, talking about hurricane season, about to start. That's what I would like you to start thinking about that. If it is Florida Power and Light, the one that has to come with their trucks and check the trees that are close to the power lines, start, I would say, now. Don't wait. Please don't wait. We cannot afford it. Number two, a suggestion maybe many years ago, I remember we went to someplace down in the Southwest and we had, in case there was an emergency, we had kind of triage training. In case there was an emergency, some people volunteered to go and do that. I'm seeing here that you have in the agenda something about emergency hurricane plans. How about in problems that I encountered during this last storm is maybe there are residents that are willing to volunteer to say after the storm that we could help in any way in our block, around our community in any way. So just like we had Neighborhood Crime Watch and you had volunteers, use the people that you can use that are willing to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Pamela Quiroga.
Good evening. My name is Pamela Quiroga. I am here representing my son, Luca Bravo, and a group of 33 plus children who are on the massed wait list for the upcoming school year. We are a group of families that have come together to review the interlocal agreement, and due to concerns and issues regarding some vagueness regarding the allocation and spaces indicated and promised to KB children, and some lack of transparency in some of the numbers, we have met with Ms. Rojas, the school board representative, last week and intend to do so this week as well, requesting further information and in hopes to address our concerns further. We're here today to request the village's support to Luca and the other 33 plus kids in not only supporting what the amendment says. I realize that this is not a new issue. From my understanding, it's been an issue probably since the last 3 to 4 years from what I have gathered. And not only looking to seek the village's support and as the agreement indicates for possible expansion and interventions, we're asking for insight into how the village in conjunction with the school board are ensuring that these mass spaces are going to true Key Biscayne full-time residents, not how they intend to do it, but what is being done today. So we're here, we plan on continuing to gather and continue to have the kids' voices be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, and speakers, please mention your address for the record. Larson Marcelo.
Good evening, Ms. Mayor and council members. My name is Marcelo Larsen. I'm a Key Biscayne resident for more than 10 years. I'm here to support, in order to support my son, who is currently waitlist in Mast Academy. Many years ago, we supported the idea of having Mast Academy as a potential place for middle and high school for our kids here. Probably this problem started many years ago when our kids were about to start elementary school, and we found out there were like more than 60 kids with no space in the elementary school. At the point that the elementary school had to open 2 classes to hold those kids. 5 years later, those kids graduated, and now we have the problem that we are short of space. As my prior the prior mother, Ms. Quiroga, already expressed, we would like to know, would like to have the support for the council about this issue for us. Sending our kids to a private school would imply a significant amount of money for not only for the next 3 years, but probably for the next 4 years as well, I mean 7 years for private schools, when we have an excellent education places here in the Key. For some reason, KBCS middle school is not offering an appropriate educational proposal at the point that many people like us who are willing to send our kids to Mass Academy and not here in our local school. But I'm not here to discuss about that. So our proposal is to get your support. As we supported the idea many years ago, we voted, we helped with our property taxes contribution for education, and it will be like a double taxing, paying a private school and also paying for the education for Mass Academy as well. So we would like to know if it's feasible to add either a portable classroom or distribute those 30-plus kids, which is not a huge amount of kids, for the next 3 years at Mass Academy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Denise Pasos.
Hello, good evening. I'm not going to take her time. My problem is the same as the other parents. It's the wait list for MAST.
Your name and your address, please.
I'm sorry?
Your name and your address.
Denise Pasos. I live in Key Biscayne.
Street address.
Your address.
747, I didn't put that? 747?
Yes, but we have to state it for the record.
Okay, 747 Crandon Boulevard, apartment 310. So it's the same matter as the Key Biscayne wait list. We just ask for your support, and hopefully we can get some or all of the kids in the wait list into MAST. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Juan Santagua.
Santaella. That's fine. Good evening. Juan Santaella, 360 West Heather Drive. Yeah, I'm not a physician, but I have terrible handwriting.
One would think.
Apologize for that. Again, Juan Santaella, 360 West Heather Drive. I'm going to read from my notes. I'm here today to speak to you in favor of the candidacy of Mr. Joe Rasco for the position of building manager. I know we all know him. He has been a resident for over 40 years. He's also served this community both as a council member, as a mayor. I think that Mr. Rasco is a perfect match for the village. His qualifications and management experience make him uniquely qualified to be an effective manager. First, he has the educational background, the experience, the professional experience, both in the private and the government sector. Second, his knowledge of key issues facing the village going forward is second to none. Let's remember that he served in the first village council in 1991, then as vice chair of the local planning agency, and later as mayor. I know that Mr. Rasco is committed with our 2020 vision statement and to maintaining our community character and the quality of life of Key Biscayne. Third, he has an active member of the community. He currently serves in the Virginia Key Advisory Board, representing our interest. And I know that he and his wife, Anna, are both active parishioners in St. Agnes Catholic Church. And I guess the best of all, he's not looking for a job to come down to Florida. He already lives here. He lives down the street, 310 West Heather Drive. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ivy Garcia. Uvy Garcia.
Yes, hi, good evening. Evie Garcia, 201 West Heather Drive. I am also here, like many of the other parents, concerned about Mass Academy and the situation with admissions and the waiting list, and really especially, which correlates directly to the waiting list, is the address verification situation that we're having. I have many friends whose kids go to Mass Academy, and I've asked them, and they have never been asked to verify their address other than the time in which they applied. And that's ridiculous. That's such a simple thing to do. We do it for the toll. Why can't Mass Academy be getting verifications? People move. A lot of people have vacation homes here, rentals that they're using the addresses to be able to have their children. And we have so many Key Biscayne residents. I'm a full-time born and raised in Key Biscayne resident, and I can't get my child in that school. And that's a shame. So something that really needs to be looked into. And I also support Joe Rasco.
Thank you very much. And that concludes your public comment.
I apologize, Mayor. I have a statement that was emailed to council yesterday by a resident, Judd Kurlanchik, and if I was told to read it into the record.
Please
if
do.
I may. Good evening. I hope you are all doing well. I wanted to take the opportunity to provide you with my comments and suggestions regarding the proposed building, planning, and zoning fee schedule that is under consideration this evening. Number one, the fee schedule does not show the existing fees. As such, it is very difficult to compare the existing fees with the proposed fees. Number two, for projects that require a traffic study, such as development at the entry block or the Silver Sands property, the applicant is required to submit a traffic study. Most governments, including Key Biscayne, engage the service of a traffic consultant to prepare such a study. Depending on the scope of work, the cost of the study can easily exceed $25,000. Most governments require the applicant to pay for this traffic study. The proposed fee ordinance does not include this fee. Number three, the inspection plan review fee, page 6, is based on a price per quarter hour. This is highly problematic. It requires the inspector to maintain a log of the time that is spent performing the review. Often the inspector will call an applicant with a conversation that may last only a few minutes. There is no check and balances to the amount of time that the inspector enters into the logbook with the actual time spent reviewing a project. Also, someone will have to monitor the time to determine the accuracy of each entry. The new permit system should be able to handle the entry of time and automatically calculate the fee. Number four, the fee schedule provides for a property owner to submit an application for a building permit for work that did not receive a building permit. This option should only be allowed if the property owner did not do the work. Also, the schedule says the director may waive the fee if a property owner who did not perform the work in good faith is trying to get a permit to remedy the situation. The waiver of the fee should not be at the direction of the director.
Minutes are up.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
The point of order, the purpose of this was to get it in the record. Just put it in the record. You don't have to read it.
Thank you. Next item, if we may proceed to item 4C, update regarding search for a village manager by WD from Mercer Group, Florida.
Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, for the record, I'm W.D. Higginbotham with the Mercer Group. I appreciate you affording me a
Sorry, sir, can you speak a little louder? I'm hard of hearing.
I appreciate you affording me a few minutes this evening. I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I'll summarize where we are and what I would recommend to you this evening, where I think we should go from this point. I met with you earlier, all of you earlier. In February, we began an outreach program sometime around the middle of February. The outreach was extensive. Aside from the advertising, there was some one-on-one outreach on my part, not only with candidates, potential candidates, or persons that I felt could be potential candidates, not only in Florida, but outside of the state as well. When we closed the recruitment on March the 16th, we had received 38 responses. Not as well as I had anticipated, but nonetheless, that's what we received. Of the 38 responses, after reviewing the resumes, I elected to pursue 11 of them. By saying, when I say pursue that, I interviewed the candidates, I did background research on them. Of the 11 candidates, I chose to recommend 4 to you as potential candidates to consider further for further consideration as your village manager. One of the candidates withdrew. As a matter of public record, it was your police chief was a viable candidate, but he elected to withdraw his candidacy about a week after the recommendation was made to you. We have 3 candidates that I think are worthy of your consideration, but Madam Mayor, council members, this evening, what I'd like to recommend to you and request of you, your approval, is to allow us to reopen the recruitment. Subsequent to March 16th closing date, we had more than one candidate respond well after the closing date. And I think they deserve consideration. I have not done any research on the candidates, but I think they need to be considered. What I'd like to do is reopen the recruitment and as I would put it, open until filled, but I do not want there to be an endless date for candidates to respond. What I would recommend we do on such a search is that have incremental dates, perhaps like every 10 days, review the candidates. I'll do the research as I need to do, and if we receive viable candidates, I would like to add them to the remaining 3, and I would not recommend we pursue anything this evening with 3 that I presented to you earlier, but they could be put into the mix with any additional candidates we receive. I will keep you posted on where we are and the candidates we receive and what I think they would fulfill what you're looking for in your next village manager. We can keep it open, as I said, until we receive the candidates that ultimately the candidate that would satisfy your what you're looking for in your next village manager. I'm here until that occurs, and with that, Madam Mayor, council members, I open it up for any questions.
Sure, and I believe Mr. Brett Moss has a question. I have a question, Katie, and okay, everyone seems to have a question.
Okay, that's fine. That's what I'm here for.
WD, you mentioned that the amount of applicants we got was not what you anticipated. What kind of number did you anticipate typically?
Madam Mayor, council member, there's no magic to the numbers. 2 years ago, we could expect 70, 80, upwards of 100 candidates to respond. Throughout, not only in Florida, but throughout the country, the economy was bad. The village has the good fortune of increasing assessed values, but that's not been shared by many communities around Florida and around the country. When there's shortage of funds and their employees are being laid off, the manager typically is responsible for what results in the community, and we have more managers that become transient, let's put it that way. The candidates I spoke to that I figured were viable candidates for consideration here in the village, they all were. I spoke to 13, 9 in Florida. I got only 1 that chose to respond. I would have welcomed all 13. I would have done a lot more research. I wouldn't have just accepted the 13. But in answer to your question, sir, when you have a manager who is happy, and I spoke with several in Miami-Dade County, some in Broward, some in Brevard, and some in Pinellas County. But that being said, you have a manager who is happy where they are. They have no issues with their elected body. Things are going well, revenues are increasing. There's not a lot of incentive to move. And beyond that, there's not much I can say. But I will tell you, without exception, every time you close a recruitment, there's always someone that comes in afterwards. And I've heard from 2 candidates since March the 16th. They did not respond before the deadline. I don't walk around with a stopwatch, but it's something that comes in a week after the closing is stretching the point a little too much. If I'd have heard from someone, we closed on Friday at the end of the day, if I'd have heard from someone later that evening or even on Saturday, I would have given them consideration. But a week later is stretching the point, and that in itself really reopens it, and I don't have the authority to do that.
Did he answer your question?
Yes.
Katie, and then I'll.
All right, 2 quick questions. First of all, by extending and opening it up again, what are we jeopardizing the semifinalists you brought before us, and would they be willing to wait?
Madam Mayor, council member, I would hope not. I know the candidates. I've spoken with them. They're waiting to hear where we are, and I've asked them to hold off until I've had an opportunity to get direction from you this evening. So one of the first things I'm going to do is notify the candidates that and I will say this because I join in on this concern. I'm not happy with having brought to you only 3 candidates for your consideration. It makes for a very difficult decision on your part. And I would like, there's no magic to the number. I would have liked to have had 6, 7, 8 candidates semifinalists, and I don't know that we'll get those. But I'm confident we're going to end up with more than 3. Now, whether 4, 5, or 6 is going to be a satisfactory number, I'm going to have to make that determination and then make the recommendations to you. But in answer to your question, I do not think we'll jeopardize those candidates, but there's always that possibility.
Okay, and secondly, is there anything that you envision doing in the second round that's different that you did in the first? Any changes in your procedures moving forward to find candidates?
Madam Mayor, council member, no, ma'am. There's not much I could do different. I get personally involved. I make personal phone calls. I reach out myself. I don't ask someone else to do it for me. And if I hear from a candidate, they're going to talk to me. They're not going to speak with someone else. I can answer the questions. I think I can answer the questions that they have. And as I mentioned to you before, what I obtain from them, I'm going to share with you when it comes down to recommendations, if in fact they would be somebody I would recommend. But in answer to your question, I would probably do nothing different. I may reach out a little further than I did before. If that's different, then that would occur. But I'm not going to contact the same candidates, no, but I'm going to perhaps reach out a little bit further. I don't have anybody in mind.
So, Mr. Hickenbotham, after you sent us your recommendations and the 4 candidates, and I had the opportunity to reach out to 4 or 5 candidates or individuals that I thought would be very good and uniquely qualified for the job. And I heard some interesting feedback that I would like to share with everyone. One, they were incredibly surprised that we didn't get more applicants. They think it's a very good job. We are very stable. It's a great job to have. People are looking for jobs like this. 2, they thought that people expressed that there was a perception that we were going through the exercise of a hire, but that we already had someone in mind. And so why put themselves out there and jeopardize their current jobs if we were just going through this exercise and we were really not considering anyone from the outside? So that was troubling to me, but it makes sense. How do we overcome that now? What can we do? What can we say? And I have to say, these individuals were very receptive, and they said, if you all were to open up the application pool, we will suggest people, because people are looking for these jobs, but there was a perception that this was really for show. How can we address that so that we get really good candidates who actually would love to be here?
Madam Mayor, in answer to your question, that comes up all the time. When I speak with a candidate, one of the first things they ask me, is there an in-house candidate? Is there somebody? And I'll be very candid with them. We did not have an in-house candidate. The police chief responded to the advertisement on the last day. Nothing wrong with that, but until I received his response, I had no in-house candidate, and there was no one that I knew was an heir apparent. And I could say that very honestly. I had not spoken with anyone, and no one had told me that there was an heir apparent. And I didn't expect it. And I have to tell you that if you present to me someone you think is an heir apparent, I'm going to vet them just like I would anyone else, and I'm going to make a recommendation to you. But in answer to your question, that's always something that comes up. When we reopen the recruitment, that fear disappears, because if there was an heir apparent, if there was somebody that you were anticipating and we were going through the motions, that person would be on that list that you would want to interview now and move that person forward. In answer to the fact that we reopen it will address that issue.
And can we also tweak the advertisement to make it a little stronger and a little more clear that we are absolutely, serious about finding the best possible candidate? I mean, I just think it has to be more forceful. And I'm a believer in having deadlines. So whether it's another 20 days, I think this rolling deadline gets you into trouble. That's just my personal perception.
It's my turn?
Your turn, Gary, and then Frank.
I agree with the deadlines. I think we need to get this going. We need to find that best person, and I think what you need is direction from us in order to reopen like we had a conversation. You said you didn't feel comfortable interviewing anyone else until you got direction from us.
Yep, Madam Mayor, Councilman, that's correct. I have no authority to go beyond the 16th.
I understand that, and I think that's what you're hearing today. And in particular, the reason that I voted for you as my number one person when we were choosing our consultant is because I was impressed with your answer when you gave it to us with regards to being able to go out and interviewing people that may not have applied for the job. Why? Because I believe that there's a couple of different reasons. People that are happy with their job is the kind of people that we want, not somebody who's necessarily unhappy because the unhappiness may be sourced in them. Number two, well, that's the most important thing that I tried to get across to you, and that we don't necessarily need to wait for people to come and apply to us, but you impressed upon me that you would be able to go out and find somebody that is very happily employed somewhere else and coming over here. The second thing is that those people that are happily employed may not necessarily want their employers to know that they're looking for a job, so they're not going to apply. Because once they apply, then it's public knowledge.
They won't be as happy tomorrow.
That's right. So I think that going forward, I think you'll understand where we are all coming from, and good luck to you.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, you're correct. And I do reach out. I look for someone that's happy in the position, and I have to encourage them to make application here. But as soon as they do, it becomes public record. And if they're happy where they are, and believe me, I've had a number of discussions like that. WD, this sounds good, but, I'm competing, and as soon as it becomes public, I've got 5 elected officials or 7, whatever the number may be. They all like me. I'm real happy here. I have no incentive to leave, but if I become public a candidate, then I may have created a reason to leave. So it's a difficult situation, but it's one that I deal with.
Right.
I think that this is a difficult problem. To me, in my opinion, is the best possible next manager we have is someone who is currently a very successful, happy, well-adjusted, and well-thought-of manager someplace else. The difficult part is finding a way to entice somebody like that to put his name on the list, as Lucho just said. It's different. Your job and our job is different than in private enterprise. When I had to hire a high-level person for my firm, I identified who I thought was good. I interviewed them, and if I liked them, I made them an offer. And then they could consider an offer before they had to announce anything. This is totally different. How do you motivate someone that you know would be good for the job, someone that you think would be very interested in the job, but isn't willing to jeopardize what he has and take a chance that he might not get it, and then basically cook his own goose with his current employer? How do you overcome that?
Madam Mayor, Councilman, there's, and I'll not pat myself on the back, but they do have faith in me when I'm talking about and what their chances are in getting the position. But they know that I'm not the one that's going to vote on it. They know that there are 7 of you that are going to make that selection, and I can only recommend to them. We talked about the cost of living here, the issues. all of those issues come up when I'm in a discussion with a candidate. They want to know everything I can tell them about each of you individually and as a group. The village here is, I mean, I'm not telling you something you don't feel or believe. This is a paradise here. It's an affluent community. It's well educated. The cost of living is quite high, and that is an issue I had with every single candidate. That would become part of their negotiation for the position. They're all aware of that they would have to deal with that. You know, it's just a matter of I have to go out there and convince them that this is the place to be. I don't think any one of them had any reservations. This would be a nice place, but they're giving up where they are now, and why do they want to take that risk? And that's what it comes down to it. WD, this is great. I'm so glad you called me, but thanks, but no thanks.
Well, how can we, and this has been asked before, but in a different way, how can we sweeten the pot? Understandably, the cost of living on this island is extremely high compared to almost any place. Can we, in effect, tell you that you have the authority to say that there is a housing allowance that would help someone? Because obviously we would want our next manager to live here and be a part of the community. If there's something you need that you think will really help overcome some of these concerns you've heard, share it with us, please, and maybe we can give you the authority to put that in your package and allay some of these fears.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, I would not want you to give me authority to start negotiating with a candidate before you've selected them. That goes beyond what I would like to do. I don't hesitate to tell them that ultimately they're going to negotiate a package, because that's their, that's what they're going to do. And it could very well be a housing allowance. None of the managers I've spoken with are ignorant about some of those possibilities. Even when I'm talking to candidates from out of the state legislature several years ago said, well, you can't give severance more than, I think it's 22 weeks. Well, there's ways to work within that in terms of the candidate's package. I don't discuss that a lot, but I do talk about that. It all comes down to negotiating the ultimate package. And I may participate in that if you allow me to or want me to. I will. If you don't, then I won't. And that's been both ways.
Can I just follow up? I'm sorry, Frank, I know you're next, but I promise I'm going to be short. And it's directly related to what Gary just asked. Was there any other feedback that you got from people who ultimately were not interested that are things that we could address beyond the cost of, you mentioned cost of living, was there anything else?
I can't say that there was any single issue. The issue that came up with everyone I spoke with was cost of living. Not one of the candidates I spoke with, by the way, that I reached out to was unaware that you were looking for a village manager. Our outreach program, it's rather broad in terms of what, that every viable quality manager that was out there knew that you were looking for a new village manager. And Key Biscayne caught their attention. When I called them, they were not surprised that you were looking, but in answer to your question, there was no single issue other than they were just what I was looking for. They were content. They were doing a good job. They were loved by their community and their elected body. And all of those are the reasons why they didn't want to leave. And but that's what we're looking for. I wasn't out looking for somebody that's hunting for a job. One of the things I heard from most of you, if not all of you, is that you didn't want me to bring someone to you that was unemployed and they were going to take a job just to get employed again. That's not what you were looking for, nor was it anything I was looking for either.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Frank?
I think I want to just support your recommendation, but I want to be mindful of the clock. And specifically, we've discussed this in the past. We've got budget season coming up, and it would be nice to know who we're going to be working with through the budget season.
Sure.
So you're aware of that?
Oh, yes, sir. I am.
A reminder. Are you satisfied that our solicitation materials describe us in the positive way that we intend?
I think so. There was nothing negative there. We did reach out, and the job announcement set forth some of the requirements that you presented to me, and then I presented back to you, and I got some feedback, and then I went forward with the job announcement and the ultimate brochure. If I would have done something different, I would have had maybe more photographs, but, we weren't preparing a tourism brochure. I have to realize that. And although I do get something that is presented a lot of times with, but there's, I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
I think we put that together hastily, but I reread it recently, and I think it's a good job, and I think it presents us in the positive light.
Oh, I think so. I mean, there's nothing negative about being a manager of Key Biscayne Village.
No one else can say what we can say.
Well, of course not.
No one else can say.
Yeah, I know. I've not met an elected
Not in the
body
state of Florida,
person in
anyway.
Florida that doesn't think they're living in paradise. So you're not unique, believe me. There's 410 cities in Florida, and most of them consider their home paradise.
Yeah, but ours is really a paradise.
Well, of course
It's called that. It's in the name.
We're right. I think the last thing I want to say is really for us. I don't know that we will have perfect consensus among ourselves on the type of qualities and characteristics each of us think is primarily important. And we probably ought to prepare so that we can be most efficient when it comes time to assess these candidates. And if we can get some of the consensus building out of the way earlier, this is actually independent of who these candidates are going to be ultimately. It's our own methodology. I think we should do that.
Fair enough. And so, Council, do we have consensus to instruct Mr. Higginbotham to go forward and extend and open the application process? And do we want to do 20 days or do we want to do rolling?
What do you think you need?
Madam Mayor, can I clarify something?
Yes.
I agree with you. There has to be some sort of deadline, but I don't want to say, what I'm suggesting is that we have a rolling deadline. And what I mean by that is that without having a deadline, it's open until filled, but resumes and responses will be evaluated every 10 days, starting on such and such a date. That creates a deadline, because if we have a deadline 30 days from now, we're going to get some candidates that's going to wait till the very end. Many do.
So if I could translate, because I want to understand this. What you mean is that you will assess, say, every 7 or 10 days, and at the time that you feel that you have the critical mass of quality candidates, that's when you will declare an end to it and you will bring it forward to us.
Yes, sir, that's what I will. And there's no magic to the number. I'm suggesting to you that there's 3 right now that are out there. Ultimately, if you decide and again, no magic to the number, let's say we have 6 or 7 candidates, I think you should select from this group to interview. You may want to interview 3, and it may include some of the 3 that are there today, it may not. It will be some of the others, but and again, there's no magic to the number. But at that point in time, when I feel like we have a group of candidates that you can select from, and there will be a general consensus that there's some positive candidates there. The response was, and I'm not reflecting negatively on what we have, but the response was not, I assure you, no one was more disappointed than I. I know those of you I spoke with were less than enamored with what we got, but we have the responses we have.
Okay.
So the nature of the rolling proposition is that you'll bring this back to us, say, 10 days hence.
Oh, yes, sir. I will.
And we will
evaluate.
collectively determine when enough is enough.
Yes.
And, and we will, if I come to you with 6 candidates and say, we've got 6 good candidates here, and if I get something back from you, and I encourage you to call me, some of you did, some of you perhaps didn't have an opportunity, but nonetheless, I got some feedback, and it's individual. I can't share my feedback with you. I could do it tonight, but because we're in a public meeting, but the conversations we all had, I had with some of you individually, the conversations we had, and we discussed some one-on-one discussions about the candidates, and I'm very comfortable in doing that. I don't mind doing that. That's what I'm here for.
I have a suggestion. I don't think this is a numbers game.
No.
I believe that the cutoff should be when you feel, because you have a really good sense of what we're looking for, when you feel you've got 2 or 3 candidates, all of whom meet those criteria, bring them to us. But just to say, okay, it's been 10 days and I've got 4 more candidates, and I don't think that it's not a numbers game. You've got to use your knowledge and your judgment to know whether you've got the right candidates, and at that point, that's when the rolling stops.
And I completely agree with you, sir. I'm going to come to you with some recommendations, and if you say, well, gee, let's interview 3 of these, and if you don't like the 3, that doesn't mean we stop there. I mean, we will move forward. I've said it to you before, good, bad, or whatever. I'm here as long as you want me to be. I'm not going to go away until you have the village manager you're looking for. So.
Thank you.
Just
Katie and then Allison.
This is more an operational thing. I had heard that there was some difficulty searching for our job position on the ICMA website. When you do this and reopen it, can you just make sure that it's there and easily searchable?
I'm sorry, I don't
The
understand.
ICMA has a job posting website, and I think somebody couldn't find our actual job on that website. So I don't know how that works, but
Well, I would.
because that's that main agency you spoke about.
ICMA, first of all, they have a job board, and it's on their website. But more important than that is they publish a weekly newsletter every Tuesday. I can paste an ad on Monday, and it'll show up on their Tuesday newsletter. Key Biscayne I put Key Biscayne as a featured ad, so even on their website, it was among the first page. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. If I'm looking for a city attorney, I do the same thing. They have featured positions, but Key Biscayne was on the front page of the weekly newsletter that came out every week, and it reached over 10,000 members that are ICMA they're ICMA members, and they're not a member of ICMA if they don't have some background, some association with the public sector management, and their ethics are clean.
And it goes online also?
Oh, yes, it's online also. I can't imagine that anyone went to ICMA and they couldn't see Key Biscayne. Now,
I don't know. I was just asking you to do a double check.
okay. Well,
okay,
now,
that's
when we reach the closing date, it'll disappear.
Okay.
It won't continue beyond that, so.
No problem.
I just wanted to say why I like the rolling rather than one set final date is I actually think that it gives us an opportunity to get quality people faster.
Yes.
That rather than waiting till the end, and to Gary's point, obviously don't just bring us anyone that is within those 10 days, but when you have the quality people.
Yeah, it's a rolling deadline, and if someone's interested, they're going to meet that deadline.
I do think that it needs to be followed up with some heavy, again, one-on-one calls and recruiting, that it's not just going to happen by itself, and there
Certainly.
has to be a reinforcement out there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I understand. I will start the advertising tomorrow.
Thank you.
Be careful driving back.
See, I couldn't, if I spent the night here tonight, I couldn't do that tomorrow, but I'll get it done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilor.
Thank you.
And next, we have special presentation by our legislative.
Sorry for that.
Oh, no.
We'll work together.
Fausto Gomez.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, council members, Fausto Gomez, it's always a pleasure to be in front of my hometown city council. And first of all, even though I'm probably the one who lives closest to City Hall, for a minute who's speaking for you in front of you tonight, I'm sorry I'm late. We were making a presentation in Surfside at the other side of the county. Joining me here tonight is Jonathan Kilman, who is legislative counsel to our firm. As many of you are aware, Gomez Barker has expanded quite significantly. We have a former Senate president. We have the former president of ATT Florida with us. And Jonathan as legislative counsel was counsel to the Florida House of Representatives and Governor Charlie Crist. So now we have within our firm also legal abilities that we did not have before. So the firm has expanded, it's grown, and obviously we appreciate representing Key Biscayne and allowing you for us to speak on your behalf in Tallahassee. So what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about appropriations, and I know Nick Duran was here before. He called us before he came over, and we were going over some of the things that we did, and then Jonathan will briefly touch on some of the issues regarding policy and preemption and things of that nature. So let me just say about appropriations. We secured $911,036 for beach renourishment out of Tallahassee. Now, let me tell you how we did that. House of Representatives had beach renourishment funding money as the Senate did as well. However, the House of Representatives had provisions that did two things. First of all is that it would fund projects 1 through 20, and we were project 21st. And the second thing it did is it would give priority to inlet funding off the top. So therefore, prior to funding coming to municipalities or local governments, all inlet funding would be off the top and probably take a majority of the appropriated dollars for beach renourishment. So our task was twofold. Our task was to make sure that whatever passed did not have a limitation that the only projects that could be funded were 1 through 20, since Key Biscayne was 21st. Okay? And we were successful in that. And our second priority was making sure that we took away off the language giving priority to inlet funding so there were sufficient dollars to come down to Key Biscayne. And we were successful in that. Our third priority was making sure that there were significant dollars so that $50 million appropriated so they could reach the 21st project, which is Key Biscayne. And we were successful in that. So essentially, Key Biscayne has been allocated, again, $911,036 for beach renourishment efforts. I'm proud to say that that coupled with our $165,000 last year for the streetlights, and then we were short $75,000, and we called Commissioner Suarez, and we were able to get that. So on a 2-year basis, essentially, just in appropriations, our efforts has generated, quite frank, over $1 million. If you're going to do specifically $570,000 a year from state and local resources to Key Biscayne. And that does not include policy issues, which Jonathan will talk about. Now, let me talk a little bit about appropriations in general this year, and I'm sure Nick sort of spoke to you about that briefly. Water projects, which usually are in the $100 million range, were $30 million this year, 70% cut. Okay? For example, if you're looking at historical and cultural grants, $24 million last year, $2.4 million this year. That is the fiscal environment that we had to deal with in Tallahassee. In addition to that, if you look at the water projects that were funded, and I'm focusing on water projects because Key Biscayne had a solicitation for a water project. 88% went to Republican members. 12% went to Democratic members. Okay? Obviously, it's an election year, and there was a political vent to the appropriations process to try to protect the Republican members to bring something home and to try to not afford Democratic members the same opportunity to bring projects home. So notwithstanding that, I'm very proud of the funding that we were able to secure for Key Biscayne for beach renourishment. So that's a little bit of the ambient this past legislative session when it came to the appropriations process, coupled with $400 million going to Parkland correctly, coupled with revenue estimating coming down $75 million before the budget was formulated. You essentially had a cut of $500 million straight off the bat to formulate the project. Usually projects in Tallahassee, the budget in Tallahassee for projects, water projects, road projects, things like that, that we have traditionally secured for you and successfully secured for you, range in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 million on an annual basis. Frankly, that money was gone. and that money was gone for the Parkland issue, which was $400 million off the top, and then $75 million less with regards to a revenue estimating conference delayed. So in the appropriations process, we're very successful and glad to report to that to you. We want to thank Representative Duran certainly for all his efforts, as well as Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez for all his efforts as well. In particularly also members from outside the Village of Key Biscayne delegation, who were quite helpful to us and fought for Key Biscayne, notwithstanding we're not in their home district. And frankly, I think that is a testament to the strength of our team and the relationships that we have. We could get members from outside of Key Biscayne who don't represent us to go to bat for us and to make sure that appropriations flow to Key Biscayne for beach renourishment in order to make the appropriate changes to the language and things of that nature. So I'd like to call Jonathan up for him to discuss briefly some of the policy issues. Before I do, let me just say one thing in particular. I don't know if you all recall last year, House Bill 17, which was the bill that essentially would have made local governments redundant. Redundant because it said that any ordinance passed by a local government would have to be confirmed and approved by the state legislature. And frankly, that basically means that the state legislature would be the sort of the big government in the sky, local government in the sky. Last year, the focus was on defeating House Bill 17. This year, there was an insidious provision, which I sort of call son of House Bill 17, which was stuck in the House tax bill that would say that a local government could not regulate or prohibit any good that paid a state sales tax. In other words, notwithstanding whatever ordinances that we have with regards to zoning or things of that nature, if somebody wanted to come to Crandon and open an adult store pays state sales tax. And so therefore, they would be able to open an adult store on Crandon, okay? Notwithstanding what our ordinances, regulations, or plannings were. That was in the House bill, stuck in there quietly. I will basically say that our team was the first one to found it, and working with other local governments, we were successful in excising that out of an amendment out of the tax bill in the House, and the tax bill that passed did not include what we call son of House Bill 17, which would have taken essentially a lot of our governing provisions away. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pleasure to be here. I want to begin by giving a bit of color to the environment that developed in the legislature following the shooting in Parkland at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in February. And Representative Moskowitz is here this evening, is all too aware of what I'm about to say, which is that the issue consumed the conscience, the focus, the emotion, and the energy of the legislature, of legislators from all over the state who had to deal both with the personal issues involved, but frankly, an extraordinary call to simply do something and not let an issue like this pass where, as politics often does, an issue of significant import results with no meaningful action, no resolution. As a result of that, there were some significant bills that otherwise would have gotten a lot more attention that did not. By way of example, this is the third legislative session in a row where a significant transportation legislative package did not pass. I think that would likely have been a different outcome had the focus been there to help bring it in for a landing. Similarly, significant insurance legislation did not pass. Another example would be the texting while driving bill, which I know is important to many of you. It would have escalated the ban to a primary offense under Florida law. Did not pass, passed the House, failed in the Senate. There are philosophical reasons as well. There's some libertarian viewpoints in leadership. But again, I think we will see certain bills like that come back to the legislature next year and perhaps get some more attention when an issue like the Parkland shooting is not so all-consuming. I want to address also something that Fausto mentioned, which is the extraordinary amount of preemption and activity occurring that is a threat to local government power in Tallahassee. It appears to be a significant trend. I'm not sure it's one that is going to go away, despite the fact that working alongside a lot of other local government advocates in Tallahassee, we were successful in defeating a lot of these issues. I want to give you a few brief examples. I know, for example, Lime Bike has been a popular service here on the Key, and there was a bill that was filed that would have preempted local government's ability to enter into or to regulate dockless bike sharing within its own borders. I know it sounds like it's very, very in the weeds. It is, and it's atypical, but it appears to be the current trend in Tallahassee. Another example is the preemption bill with respect to short-term rentals. It would have eliminated the grandfathering, by way of example, that some municipalities currently enjoy in its regulations on short-term rentals. And finally, a bill that would have preempted the ability of local governments to regulate tree trimming and tree removal on private property, something that seems very standard behavior for local government. And this is just a few examples. I wanted to point it out because I think it's something that you'll see your lobbying team continuing to have to work on in next year and perhaps in future years, because it seems to be a current trend in Tallahassee that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. And those are the sort of things I think we'll need to communicate with you about in the upcoming year as they develop. And I suspect you'll want to take a strong position on each of those issues.
What should we know about Amendment 1? What should we know about Amendment 1 that they're putting together with the homestead exemption and such?
Oh, do you want to take?
Yeah, that's on the ballot this November.
Right.
That essentially, if it passes and it gets 60% of the vote, would significantly affect every local government's revenues quite significantly. So let me tell you sort of the good thing. If you sort of put on the ballot for the average citizen to say, you want to cut your taxes? Probably the answer is yes. Okay. However, the Constitutional Revision Commission is meeting and will also have a number of provisions on the ballot. Some of those provisions are probably less, the citizen will be less inclined to vote for them. And so what you may have is voter fatigue when it comes to the ballot in November, where you have a significant number of constitutional amendments on the ballot. Okay? And what you now have the Constitutional Revision Commission doing is taking disparate elements and formulating particular language. So you may have 3 or 4 disparate elements in one constitutional amendment. Usually when things like that happen, the voters basically say, we don't understand this, let's vote no on everything.
One more question. Do you make everybody cut their hair like yours when
Yeah, it is a firm requirement that everybody be bald.
It's not the nature of your job causes you to pull your hair out.
That was many years ago.
What is who helped us, the extra jurisdictional help? Can you recall offhand?
Sure. Senator Campbell, for example, helped us. Representative Geller helped us. Senator Flores helped us. Significant number of individuals who do not represent Key Biscayne went to bat for Key Biscayne.
It's good to know.
And I think that's important for having a firm like ours that reaches, from Pensacola to Key West.
Mm-hmm.
And we can access not only the people who represent Key Biscayne, but sort of bring in members from other parts of the state to advocate for Key Biscayne as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions?
Council?
Good. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next item, Mayor, is approval, deferrals, additions, deletions, substitutions, withdrawals.
Council members, I have a couple, I had just one. Okay, let's start from here. No? Katie, any changes? Allison.
I have one thing on twice. 9 and, 10A, 9, and, oh no, sorry, not 9,
13 and 16.
13 and 16.
Yes, and if I may clarify, 16 will then become Crandon Park agreement, and that will be Mayor Lindsay. And then I'll just remove the duplicated discussion item, if that's acceptable.
Okay. Mr. Manager?
Mayor and Council, if I may, I'd like to withdraw items 7A1 and item 9D.
9 what?
D as in dog.
Are we not changing the name? Thank you.
Not tonight.
It's like, does anybody remember DCF?
I'm not that right.
Fix the problem.
9D is in dog, right?
9D is in dog.
9D and 7A1.
But that was the other one I had a big question about.
7A1.
Okay, I would like to pull
This is great. I love hearing this.
item
Keep going.
8H. Oh, you're not going to like this one.
Oh, you're pooling.
And 9A from the consent agenda.
Oh. Oh, no. That's a wrong kind of pulling.
Wait,
8H, you're going to pool, and
Yes.
9A, you're removing?
I'm also going to pull, I'm
It's not a
sorry,
consent.
sorry. Just, no, then just 8H.
Just 8H?
Just 8H. I have my questions for 9A. I'm sorry, I wasn't. Yes.
I was going to pull something from the consent agenda too for a quick discussion, which is 8D and 8E, the two lighting projects.
Is there such thing as a quick discussion up here?
I hope so. Just a comment more than anything, moving forward.
I hear you.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
I asked to pull 8D and 8E from the consent agenda.
D and E.
D and E.
Yeah, what about F and G? They feel lonely.
Just to recap, we are pulling 7A1, 8D, 8E, 8H, 9D, and replacing 1016 with Crandon Park agreement.
Can I make a clarification? We're removing 7A.
Yes.
Correct.
9D.
We're pulling it from the consent agenda and adding.
No, we're removing those two.
7A, okay, so
It's
7A1,
removal?
we're pulling it from the agenda.
Or is not going to be discussed today.
Correct, we're pulling it.
But the
then-
consent agenda, we're just pulling it for discussion.
Correct.
We're pulling it
Yeah, D, E, and H.
for action. All those in favor? Sorry, I'm so sorry.
In deference to people who may be here for the Virginia Key settlement, my purpose was to simply get this on the agenda for the 24th, not to discuss substantively tonight. It'll be on the agenda for the 24th, so
Okay.
that's it.
You're removing it?
Yes, yes. My purpose was to bring it forward
Which is
for
going to happen
agenda.
anyway. Got it.
Okay, so then let's also remove in the same way the boat show, because it would be a well, no, leave it.
I
It's
think we
okay.
need to accept the
Leave it, sorry.
Also, before the council votes, there were on the Lime Bike Agreement, which is 8F, a couple of dates need to be updated to reflect tonight's approval, just the term dates. And I believe that also Todd is recommending that right now they have up to 200 bikes that can be brought onto the island to do Lime Bike, and Todd wants to reduce that to 150. So with those items which was handed out, I believe, to you guys, you can adopt that as amended.
Yes, Frank.
To understand what you just said, the Lime Bike contract was dated October 17, and it runs for a year, and it's renewable. Do you mean the effect of what you just said for the Lime Bike contract to be dated April 18?
No, the Lime Bike contract was a 4-month pilot program.
Correct.
And what happened was originally the Lime Bike contract was in the agenda pipeline back in October, but got held up. So the dates that are in the backup relate to October of 17, as if you guys were approving it then. So it's just being updated to be
It'll be effective April
today.
tonight
Or, yes.
for a year, and then it'll renew.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then the other change is just Todd going from 200 bikes to 150.
Okay. Moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item would be the second reading, an ordinance of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, Village, amending the Village Code by amending Chapter 23 Retirement, Section 23-31 Definitions, Section 23-32 Membership, Section 23-39 Vesting, and Section 23-47 Commencement of Benefits to allow the police and fire chiefs to opt out of the police and fire pension plan and to provide for in-service distribution of benefits to managerial members, providing for severability, providing for conflicts, providing for inclusion in the code, and providing for an effective date.
Moved. Second.
Thank you.
I'd like to open this up for public comment.
We have no speakers signed up
So
here.
we will be closing public comments. And now I will be opening it up for council discussion. Gary.
Since I started this at the last meeting, I think we've discussed every possible aspect of this, both pros and cons. We've gotten the input from our council. We can continue talking about it or answering questions, but, you know, in my mind, I don't know that there's anything else that we haven't already talked about. So I'd like to move we call the question.
I think we have some discussion over here. So.
And I would have to unmove about
There
the
you go.
question.
Thank you. Brett and then Katie.
Again, I stand by what I said before. I think that this is something that we should do. It gives us the option to keep somebody on board that we think is excellent, and at the same time, it would save us money because we would not have a new person in the pension plan, and we would not have to contribute to that new person. However, there's been something in this that I think got people hung up on certain thing, and I would like to make a friendly amendment to it, and I would like to bring that up so we can discuss it. I think right now we should just focus on the police and the fire chief. When and if we need to bring this up in front of a possible manager, we can have this discussion again and make that adjustment. And we can negotiate at that point. That's one. Two, I don't think that it should be up to the council whether they should receive in-service distribution or not. It should be, it is or it isn't. The manager is going to decide whether they're going to continue hiring one of our chiefs, and there should be no discrepancy between one getting it and one not getting it. So whatever decision we make tonight should be something that is pretty much automatic if we rehire somebody from our force to continue working. So a couple things. One, in the ordinance title, we should remove managerial members. And I believe the managerial members would pertain to somebody as the manager of the village. Two, under the second whereas, I would strike out or a former police or fire chief who is employed in a managerial position not covered by the plan. And last, under section 23-47, commencement of benefits, I would strike out or a former police or fire chief who is employed by the village in a managerial position not covered by this plan, and then strike out after May, subject to agreement with the village. And I think if we do that, then we're only making this between the fire chief and the police chief. And when we have other things that come in front of us that we want to do, which right now we don't need to have it in there right now. And I think that we can easily get this passed, and it takes care of the issue that we have in front of us right now.
Katie.
Okay. I spoke out against this last time.
He said he wants to.
Friendly amendment.
An amendment.
okay.
So, I mean,
Yeah, that was my amendment, my
so, I
primary
mean,
amendment.
we either amend it or we don't amend it.
Okay.
I don't, I think, first of all, I think that there's a misunderstanding about the expression managerial member and managerial position. I think that's a statutory definition that includes police and fire chiefs.
Well, it's more expansive than that.
It is.
It could be anyone in a managerial position, including a police or fire chief, a village manager. If you were ever to create a assistant manager position, that would be included in that as well.
But it doesn't mean the village manager.
Correct. It's broader than just the village manager.
But if you don't have manager in there,
it could include that.
Would the police chief and fire chief still be included if we take out that section? And it would be more defined directly to their position.
Yes.
Which is really what this opt-out is for anyway.
As the statute reads, the state statute, I think managerial position includes fire chief and police chief expressly. So if you remove that expression, you have to replace it with fire chief and police chief.
Okay.
Which is already there, right?
Yes.
Then you're also limiting them to those jobs, not any other job.
And if we see a purpose for using them for another job, we bring it back up. And we're going to negotiate it at that time anyways. And I would think that if somebody was, up for an assistant manager or whatever it is, and they wanted their pension and it wasn't in the ordinance, we can come back and we can make that adjustment.
I have a different take on this since it's a friendly amendment to my ordinance.
Sure.
I'd like to give you my thoughts on it. This ordinance goes into effect prospectively, not retrospectively. And therefore, this ordinance, as we sit here today, could only apply to our current police and fire chief, and it wouldn't apply to our current manager unless at some point down the road we decided to make it retroactive, which we could, which would take another ordinance, another change. So I don't really see the benefit of removing manager from this, since it's not going to impact anyone unless we do another change to this down the road. But I believe that going forward, it should apply to a police or fire chief who still is employed but becomes the manager, if it ever happens again. So I think that what you're trying to accomplish with this amendment, Brett, is already in here because it wouldn't impact our current manager.
I agree. I'm just trying to focus it to get people comfortable, just to pass it for the issue we have on hand. Not saying, I think you're right. I think it can apply to a manager. I'm just trying to get it passed and get that comfort up here. And I know that there's one person that will be affected by this right now. The managerial, it doesn't matter whether that's there or not. It's not really affecting anybody. So I'm just trying to pinpoint it a little bit more, focused it a little bit more.
Well, I guess my question is, does anybody have a problem with it continuing to contain manager since it would only apply in the future?
I'm inclined to leave it as it is.
I am too.
But I'd like to suggest that we hear what Katie has to say and then come back to your friendly amendment and vote on it.
Thank you.
Okay. What I wanted to propose is to actually split this. And the part that I think everybody feels comfortable with is, the part I feel comfortable with right now, as it's stated, is to allow the police and fire to opt out of the pension plan for more than one reason, not just for in-service distributions, but also, if they chose, then it makes our negotiations cleaner, and we're not in a situation of conflict, which we've discussed in the past. As far as the in-service distribution, if we feel this is a good policy for our village, I think that we should treat it as a standalone. I think we should be very clear on when it applies and when it doesn't. I don't think it should only apply to two people. If we think this is a policy that is something we should put in place, we shouldn't be doing it for an individual or two individuals. It should be something that stands alone and makes sense on a broader perspective, because we don't think it's a financial burden, and that it can move forward in that respect. But it needs to be played out a little more. It needs to clearly define who has the role of making that decision. Brett talked about the manager making the decision for his employees. I believe that's true. If it has to do with us making a decision for a manager we're hiring, that needs to be distinguished in the wording, and it's not there right now. And the other thing that I would say is that I did a little bit of research on other communities. I called Miami Beach, I called Coral Gables, I called City of Miami, and none of these communities currently allow in-service distribution. That's not to say that it's good or bad, but anywhere I speak, this is something that is not in the majority of communities. It's anybody we speak to, it's very much in the minority. Again, that doesn't make it right or wrong. It just is to show that we're not behind the eight ball. We are competitive with or without this particular move.
Again, it was illegal until recently.
2016, I think.
Right, so I mean, they haven't.
Well, in 2007, it actually passed, and then there was a clarification that made people comfortable in 2015 or 2016.
2015.
So
That's why you don't see it, because it's been only less than 2 years since it was capable of being done. So maybe other municipalities haven't really had a chance to even think about it.
that wasn't the sense I got when I spoke to them, but that may be. I'm not going to. So
And
those
as
are
far
just
as-
my thoughts. I am very comfortable with half of this.
Okay.
I just want to touch on a couple of points. This came in front of us because we had a sense of urgency. We had a situation with our police chief, and we wanted to make sure that we could extend whatever appropriate arrangements he needed to stay on. My understanding is the opt-out provision is what is essential to us being able to offer our police chief his position. What the in-service distribution does can be done very many ways contractually. So, and this is what is genuinely done in other municipalities. So however you want to negotiate or incentivize or make whole, there are many other options that you can do contractually other than the opt-out. So just, but having said that, I would consider either Brett's or Katie's. I think they're both narrow enough. I think it's too broad as it sits, and I could support either doing only the opting out or doing the opting out but tailoring the scope as Council Member Moss suggested, and just so that you all know where I stand. But I think we should be deliberate and cautious. And Katie, I agree with you. My understanding is that in-service distributions have been used most in pension plans that have that they've closed, and they're no longer providing defined benefits. And so that's where you're seeing that this is primarily being used. It has not been accepted or put into practice by many other municipalities.
So just if I may respond to those couple of things, I think the reason that it only applies to the two chiefs is because they're the only ones currently that can opt out of the plan, and we can't give an in-service distribution to someone that's an active participant in a plan, so therefore we would be totally barred from trying to make it apply to anyone else. The second thing, and to me the most important thing, is I don't like being a follower, I like being a leader. And when you look at what makes up an individual's retirement plan, especially in the case of the police department, but also in the fire, a good percentage of what's in there is money they've put in themselves. I believe it's the right thing to do, that once a person is eligible to start drawing their retirement plan, and could draw it if they left here and went someplace else, that they should be able to draw it if they're willing to stay here, whether or not they make it a condition of their employment, because I truly believe it's the right thing to do. I don't think anyone can explain to me how it can make sense or be right to make someone leave in order to start drawing their retirement, as opposed to staying here and not being able to draw it. It just, to me, is totally illogical. It makes no sense, and it's not fair.
But Gary,
So
I'm sorry.
I don't care what other communities are doing, and I don't really think that this particular capability has been in existence long enough to truly get a sense of what they will do. but I think that in our particular case, we are addressing it, and I wouldn't like to bifurcate the two issues, and I would like to leave that in.
Gary, I disagree with the fact, let me start by saying, I agree with the fact that someone, if they are entitled to their monies, we shouldn't force them to leave, okay? I agree that. But I think you can achieve that very result in different ways contractually, and you can make the person whole.
There's no reason to have to look for other ways, because this is the way that makes the most sense. It's already there. It's already been funded. It's sitting there waiting to be drawn upon. So maybe you're suggesting an increase in salary or a bonus of some kind or some other financial motivation. Why would we even want to consider that when the money is sitting there that wouldn't cost us one extra nickel for them to be able to draw on, as opposed to us giving them an increase in salary to make up the difference? It's illogical.
The money will stay there and will fund the pension, so it's still money that will be a benefit to us.
Well, Gary, and please don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's wrong. I was saying that it may very well be something we want to do. I just would like to look at it, and I'd like to do it with clearer language.
Well, I personally think we've looked at it long enough, and I think I would like to have it voted on tonight.
Okay.
At the very least, I think, first of all, we need to do the opt-out. We just have to.
Correct.
Secondly, if we don't amend 2339, I don't think you can contrive by other means any economic benefit while they're still employed by the village, because that section prohibits that result.
Say that again? What is?
The language, benefits will not be payable during any period of continued employment. So the effect of what's before us is to introduce an exception. That is the in-service distribution. We've talked about the various objections that came up at the first reading. I think they've all been answered. As far as your desire to disconnect any possible consideration having to do with our manager, I fail to see how that's a council prerogative or a council decision in any event. And I'm disinclined to dodge that, if that's the right way to put it. And so I'm ready to vote, including starting with your friendly amendment. If your suggestion about bifurcating this is a tag on to Brett's idea, then we should include that and see where we get to, and then maybe we'll have a couple of other substantive observations, maybe questions for Brett, just to remind us of some of the details about how this is supposed to work. And also, I think Katie had earlier raised the point about the alternative possibility that we're not dealing with a fire chief or a police chief. We are going to be dealing possibly with a manager, and that would be a council decision because that's our hire, not the manager's hire. And it doesn't say that. That is true. Right?
Correct.
But then it should be a different ordinance, possibly.
I don't think so. I just think it's who makes the decision is the person that hires the person. It's either the manager in the case of a manager report, or it's the council in the case of the manager, or potentially a clerk, or potentially a city attorney.
So why shouldn't, to Brett's point, or if you narrow it to current fire chief or police chief, and then you have an ordinance for other individuals, whether it's the clerk. But, I mean, the issue with the clerk is that she doesn't fall under 175 or 185.
These are just the examples of when council makes the hire decision and negotiates the terms of employment. In all other cases, it's a manager function.
And the opt-out doesn't apply to the manager because he's not in the plan anyway.
So can we find agreement?
Brett, you wanted the floor.
Just one thing, I mean, the subject to agreement.
Well, you have a proposed amendment, so if you want to change it.
I don't want to change it. I just want to clarify one thing. You know, when I went back to talk to residents, one of my big arguments were this on a monetary side, this can be very beneficial for us. When we're talking about moving somebody from a fire chief into a managerial position that's no longer in that uniform at all, we're not getting that benefit there. And that's what I was talking about with people, because basically, if we can keep somebody in a position, that would eliminate one new person going into the plan. That's great for us. And that's why I think we should just narrow this one down to get this passed. I'm not against the other one, but this is what I was focusing on getting this ordinance passed on this one. And we can work on another one right after. I don't mind. And or we can wait until we're in that position. And it may be a very long time before we're ever in that position where somebody's coming in as a manager outside the fire and police
We're
department.
spending a lot of time on
Yeah,
this.
I don't particularly like the idea of waiting until the situation arises, because then it's not a policy decision, it's a situation decision. And
Well, this is a situation.
it started that way, but it isn't only, right? Like, we're not facing that with our fire chief. We're not hiring a manager who's in this situation. So if we're making it as a policy decision, we should make it as a policy decision, I think. I mean, if people are more comfortable doing it separately and we do it immediately after, I don't see the difference and I don't see the need for that. But if that's what gets it done, that's what gets it done. But to me, if we're deciding to do this as a policy decision, we should just do it.
There's another reason that we've all come to learn, which is once we study and prepare to deal with something that's substantive and abstruse, complicated, the time to deal with it is when our learning curve is up as it is now. If we leave this aside and come back to it in a year, I won't be here, but the same protracted learning curve is going to be applicable. That's just the nature of things. So we're ready, in my opinion, to do this because we've had a lot of substantive input, an unusual amount of substantive input, and I think all the questions that I've heard have been answered.
What's the motion on the floor then?
You
So
made
your
a
motion-
friendly amendment. That was friendly amendment. You didn't make a motion.
And Katie's is on top of it, right?
Well, I think they're
But
separate.
Neither one. Yeah,
Neither was seconded, so.
neither one was a motion either.
Brett, you
Well,
make the
I thought you
motion.
had a motion on the floor, right? And I made an amendment to
Friendly
yours.
amendment. Yep.
It has to be, is that a motion to make a friendly amendment?
The motion didn't have a second. so
I
there's
second
nothing
it.
to admit.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay.
Just to get,
Too late.
just to get the ball rolling. Let's go. Can you please,
Can you clarify?
which amendment? Yeah. Brett?
Brett is
Okay,
the First Amendment.
Brett.
I'm a little bit confused of where we are right now because
I am too,
I thought
so
that
I'd
you
like
said
to
you
get
want
our-
to keep managerial, but you want to use ours.
Brett's suggestion was to eliminate the clause subject to agreement with the village in 2347.
Yep.
And also to scrub out the references, both in the title and in the body of the document, to either managerial members or managerial position, and we'll have to replace that nomenclature with the chiefs,
It
words to
says
that
it there
effect.
already.
And also to
It's already
eliminate,
there.
both in the recitals and in the heading of the ordinance, the reference to the former fire or police chief.
That's
Right.
it.
That
was my amendment.
I'll second it.
Okay.
So why don't we call it?
Call the question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, where's
Count.
my first?
No. Councilmember.
What we're voting on?
Yes.
Yeah. So Gary, you're okay with him?
Well, we're going to vote.
Councilmember Gross.
No.
Mayor Lindsay.
Yes.
Councilmember McCormick.
No.
Councilmember Moss.
Yes.
Councilmember Petros.
No.
Vice Mayor Kaplan.
No.
Councilmember De La Cruz.
Yes.
Motion fails.
That's on the amendment.
Now, do you want to deal with Katie's
My motion?
bifurcation proposition?
Sure. Can I have a second?
Second.
Mayor Lindsay.
I think we need to be clear what.
I think it's a.
So are we saying that we're
Separate.
basically just voting on including 2332 on the opt-out and excluding all references to in-service distributions for purposes of this vote?
And then bringing that back.
Yeah.
I guess, and to bring it back at the next meeting
As a
As a
separate-
standalone?
as a standalone.
As a separate ordinance.
Okay.
Mayor Lindsay.
Yes.
Opting out.
Councilmember McCormick.
I'm sorry, can we just go over that one more time?
Yes, we're separating the opt-out from the
The
in-service.
opt-out from the
Yes.
in-service.
So the only thing that you're
The only
voting
thing we
on right
passed
now,
tonight would be the opt-out.
the only thing you're voting on right now is section 3.
Well, just to be clear, you could do this twice. You could vote on just section 3, and then you could separately vote on the in-service distribution tonight and see if there's a consensus on either or both. I mean, it's.
Or do them completely
Or just-
separate. But I think the motion on the table
Is to bifurcate.
To totally bifurcate.
Bifurcate.
And the only vote tonight would be on section 3, which is amending section 23-32 of our village code, right?
So this is just to separate them?
No.
No.
Separate and to pass.
Yes.
Opt-out only.
Yes.
So you said
No, I
yes?
said yes.
Yes. Okay.
You're not yet voting on the ordinance.
No, I know,
She
I
hadn't
know,
voted
I
yet.
got it.
No, she hadn't
Thank
voted yet.
She had not voted.
No, she said, what are we doing?
Okay, so do you want to vote, Allison?
I am voting yes.
Yes, got it. Councilmember Moss.
No.
Councilmember Petros.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kaplan.
No.
Councilmember De La Cruz.
No.
And Councilmember Gross.
No.
Motion fails.
May I introduce a few substantive reminders and questions? 2332, this is by way of reminder. This says that the opt-out occurs at any time after the effective date. Did I misremember that the notion at the opt-out was at normal retirement age or when capped under the benefits that are available under the plan, or something to that effect, as opposed to at any time?
You have a one-time option, and typically, the one time where it's exercised is either in a situation like Chief Press's, where they're completing their service in the plan and want to continue to be employed by the village, but not as a participant in the plan. The other time where this typically would be exercised is if you hire a new chief from the outside who perhaps is drawing a pension benefit elsewhere, and that you and that chief would prefer to not have that person participate in the pension plan, and they could be an employee of the village and yet outside of the plan. So those would be the two scenarios. It's a one-time option, though.
But Brett, who decides? The employee is the decider on that? The employer can decide?
It's ultimately, it's the employee who decides whether to opt out, but.
Employer can't force an employee to have to opt out.
Well, but no, however, if it's a new police chief, for example, it might be part of the agreement that you enter into to hire them.
But not an
the employee
existing.
To opt out as part of, they're contractually agreeing as part of the negotiation that they're opting out of the pension plan.
But again, reminder, doesn't this need to wait until at least they reach natural retirement age under the plan?
No.
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 So at any time means 3 months after hire.
When somebody, so we don't have this provision right now, so you're adopting this provision, and then the police chief has the option now to exercise. In the future, once this is in the plan, when you hire a new police or fire chief, they will have to make the decision, and it may be pursuant to an agreement with the council at the time of hire, whether they're going to participate in the pension plan or they're going to opt out of the pension plan.
Okay.
The agreement would be with the manager, not with council.
Well,
Correct.
generally, yes.
Correct.
Well, it really, it might not be an agreement at all. It's simply a notice to the plan administrator that they're not in the plan.
Well, but that you usually contract for that stuff.
Yes, but where this, what might come up is there may be an employment agreement
A
between the
401k.
village and that new chief whereby they agree in the contract that they are going to opt out. And in lieu of that, they're going to get a contribution into a defined contribution plan in lieu of a participation in the pension.
Or in addition to, that could also happen,
Sure.
right?
I don't think that's true. And then my other point of reminder is in 2347C. This, at one point along the way in our discussions, the timing of the in-service distribution, i.e. during continued employment, was something other than a settled issue. It's now a settled issue. This section says that the in-service distribution will be payable and receivable during employment. And I just wanted to point that out because that's not precisely where we started this discussion.
That's correct.
That is correct.
For this limited pool of employees that are
That's
eligible.
right. So this isn't written as an option. It's not written as a decision that the manager can make or a decision to be reached at by consensus with the chief and the manager. It is what it is.
Well, let me,
What does that mean?
you know what, let me take a step back, since we've tried a couple times to pass a motion and we have not failed. And let's just take a step back and remember exactly what we're looking at. So what does this ordinance as drafted do? Number one, it allows your police chief and fire chief and any future police chief or fire chief to opt out. In other words, to not participate in your police or fire pension plan, which by law, under state law, every sworn member of the police and fire department is required to participate in the plan, the only exception being the chiefs if you have the opt-out provision. So that's part one of this. Part two, the in-service distribution. What this in-service distribution provision says is that going forward, anyone employed as a police chief or fire chief or anybody employed in a managerial position who used to be in this plan may prospectively draw an in-service distribution, although there is clear language that it's subject to agreement with the village. So specifically, like if you were to adopt this ordinance, Chief Press would be able to continue working for the village because you have the opt-out and would be able to draw a pension benefit now while he continues to work for the village. The manager, the current manager, the council would still be required to take at least one additional step, if not two, depending on what the council wants to do with the manager going forward, because the manager currently has an agreement whereby he is not currently receiving his pension. So in order for him to start to receive a pension while still employed, there would need to be a second act between the council and the manager that would allow for him to draw. So this as it's written has no impact on the manager. There's also the question about prospective versus retroactive. This ordinance is only valid for prospective benefits. So even if you were to reach an agreement with the manager about drawing a benefit in the future, it would still require a second amendment to this ordinance to allow for him to receive any in-service distribution going back prior to the effective date of this ordinance, which would be tonight. So hopefully that gives you guys some clarity as to what exactly.
And he would be eligible to be considered for this.
Sure.
At this point, if we were to pass this,
the next couple of months.
prospectively,
Remember,
from this point going forward.
Again, it says subject to agreement with the village.
Yeah.
And I believe
You have to renegotiate the contract.
right now, the pension board has looked at this, the pension board lawyers looked at this and says, we construe the current employment agreement between the village and the manager to not allow him to draw his pension while he's employed here. So it would, based on the current circumstances, in order for the manager to begin drawing, it would require an amendment to that agreement, which would require a resolution by this council with the majority voting in favor of an amendment that would allow him to start drawing. And even that would only be prospectively going forward in order for there to be any retroactive receipt of an in-service distribution by the manager. It would require an additional amendment to this ordinance, so 2 more readings allowing for it to be retroactive. And there's some additional caveats. We can get way deep in the weeds about how far back it could even go retroactively, which would be either, I think, January 2016 or the date that the manager turned 62. So again, the point is, as it relates to the manager, regardless of what you do with this ordinance, giving the manager any in-service distribution would require at least 1 additional council action, if not 2.
I just think that, Brett, to recap, what we were wanting to do here was, and because of 175 and 185, we wanted to address the possibility, and Chief Press, to make sure that he could stay on. I think Brett's amendments are make it cleaner, and they're focused, and
Well, we've already.
I realize that, but I'm reiterating. Thank you.
What I was trying to get to was your point in my spiel that just confused you, which is the subject to agreement with the village part. Because in the case of Chief Press, that is not precisely correct. It is not subject to agreement with the village.
Well, the village, for purposes of that, does not necessarily mean the council.
So that's my question. Does it? Does it not?
So let's define it.
By the way, too.
And by the way, if you do that and you define it, then for fire chief and police chief, it would be the manager, and we would need a second ordinance to deal with anything else, and it would be the council.
But why even have subject? Why even have subject?
I think for purposes of this, the way I would interpret this ordinance is that the use of the word village when it relates to the manager means the council, and when it relates to anyone below the manager means the manager, because by charter, the manager has the authority over all employees that report to him, and you have authority over your charter officials. So I think
And
that's
we
already
actually
in place.
don't have authority to
But
encroach in the
Gary, at
manager's
one point
prerogative.
you thought.
Yeah, but we don't want to have discrimination. Why would we want the manager to be allowed to discriminate between two employees? I would say get rid of subject to agreement with the village. It just is. If you've been working here and you continue working here, you receive it. Why are we going to get
Sure.
into a discretion?
I want to clarify one thing. This was in here for a very specific reason. The reason being that some people were concerned that this council should have the final word over who receives an in-service distribution. And some people might say that's encroaching on the manager's ability to hire and deal with department heads. And I guess to this tiny little limited extent it does. To me, I don't care if it's in here or not. If other people feel uncomfortable not having the council make the final word on an in-service distribution, it's fine with me if it's in here. If nobody cares and they want to leave it up to the manager, it's fine with me to take it out entirely. That's why it was originally.
I don't want the village council or the manager to have any discretion on it.
Okay.
Then you have
If we're gonna do it,
discrimination.
we're gonna do it.
It's
I
just,
hear
if
you.
it is, it is. That's it.
Delete the clause.
Let's delete it.
That's all I got.
And I think,
You have to do it
I think
procedurally.
also, okay, so friendly amendment to delete the clause who's doing, I'll do it. And I also think that I'm going to bring back the second whereas, or former police or fire chief who's employed amendment, and I'll add that to that friendly amendment. So
Where's your
I'm
whereas?
going back to the beginning.
You're going back to my
I'm
amendment.
going back to yours with, yeah.
Why do we do that?
Amendment's
Because it's
done.
going to waste time. So
No,
let's do
because
it
I
one
don't
at a
agree
time.
with you.
Well, you just lost the vote, so we're going to do it again and lose
But I
another
think
vote.
we just had it, well, I think
And
we,
we're gonna lose the thing that people are in consensus about.
So let's do the
do it
one
one at a time.
and then do the other.
So,
But can you do it one at a time?
you don't, no.
Can't do it that way.
Of course you can.
Because we're going to pass one with it, and then
We're
the
not,
other
we're
one's going to
not
fail. and
passing
one-
the ordinance.
Okay, just the amendment. All right.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So your amendment is to bring back Brett's that failed and add this.
No.
My
Amendment is subject
No,
to.
I'm asking Mara.
doing? My amendment, and to add that, yes. Yes,
It's a waste of time.
Let's just
Well,
vote it.
let's
Let's just
make
vote
it
it to
fast.
get it off the floor.
yes.
I'm sorry,
I am so
state what we're
confused.
doing.
It was the same one
Jenny?
that I did.
Okay,
Because now we have consensus.
okay, so I can do a roll call for a motion to remove subject to village, which was Brett Moss's motion. Mayor Lindsay added to remove former
Fire chief or police chief?
fire chief and police chief. So that is the motion together, and then I can do a roll call.
Okay.
So what do we
But
have
everybody
before us?
understands
Basically, can I just, assuming that he
Yeah, please,
allows
Brett.
it to be added to his amendment?
Yes.
She,
It was
He's got to
his
decide.
You have one?
If you don't want that to be an
Let's do the
amendment,
subject to agreement with the village. Eliminate that.
That-
Let's vote that.
can I have a second
Yes.
for Brett
I
Moss's?
second Brett.
Do that one first.
Okay,
Get out of the way.
Councilmember McCormick?
Are we voting on this whole thing?
No, we're voting.
No.
No, just removing that one line.
Just to remove the line? Okay.
Subject to agreement with the village.
Councilmember McCormick?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Petros?
Yes.
Mayor Kaplan?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Kaplan. Mayor Lindsay,
He
I
wishes.
apologize, I had a, Mayor Lindsay,
Yes.
Councilmember Dela Cruz.
Yes.
Councilmember Gross.
yes.
Motion carries.
That consensus.
I don't-
Now,
You did it.
separately, Mayor Lindsay's amendment to Section 2, if I'm not mistaken, regarding former police chief and fire chief.
Where are we now?
Second whereas,
Second whereas,
who is employed in a managerial position not covered by the plan? Is that the whole thing?
Essentially limiting the ordinance only to the police and fire chief.
Yes.
Correct. Correct.
I need a second for that motion.
Second,
Councilmember Moss,
yes.
Councilmember Petros,
No.
Vice Mayor Kaplan,
No.
Councilmember De La Cruz,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
No.
Mayor Lindsay,
Yes.
And Councilmember McCormick.
No.
Motion fails.
So we're ready to
Vote
tackle
on-
the ordinance now.
As amended,
As amended, I move it.
Second.
Councilmember Petros,
No.
Vice Mayor Kaplan,
Yes.
Councilmember Dela Cruz,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Mayor Lindsay,
No.
Councilmember McCormick,
Yes.
Councilmember Moss.
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted on second reading. Second item, next item. It's the first item that was pulled from the consent agenda, and that would be a capital project authorizing resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, selecting Tapia Lewis M. Service Corporation for the Village Green Toddler Park Lighting Improvements Project, providing for authorization, providing for implementation, and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
Thank you.
Can I speak to D and E together, or I have to do each of them
I
independently?
can if I read the other title, and I would have to do a voice, a vote on both individually.
So should I just speak? The reason that I brought this up is I did a comparison of these two lighting bids, and you will notice that the pricing is very different on things that appear to be the same. And I did speak to Manager Gilbert and Todd Hoffelberth, just asking why this happens. And what they said is, or what Todd told me, is that this has happened in the past. He's actually noticed it, the inconsistencies when they've done lighting projects before. And that the way that he's handled it is to look at, like, basically pool all of the money that's being spent and divide it by the number of lights that are being put in our village. And there's some consistency there. The reason that I'm bringing this up is I would like to ask that we do a better job of trying to separate materials, and materials should be consistent across different projects. These just happen to fall on us on the same night. And then if there if where their profit is, we need to know where their profit is too, instead of it being kind of hidden in, I mean, that's what I'm assuming is there's a little bit of profit built into materials here and there. And neither one of these, I don't want to stop either project. I'm willing to vote for both of them, but I would just like to ask that we try to have more consistency in projects in the future on materials and labor being specifically separate. That's it.
Thank you.
So was
So we
the
can put them
motion
back
on,
in the,
Can
I add one more thing to 8D, just for the manager to put a substantial completion into it? Just want to put that on the record.
Normally speaking, that's deep in the bid, and we've had it before, but what I'm going to do is move it forward each time to the cover memo, so it's right there in front of me.
Excellent.
And the same with what Councilmember Petros is referring to. It'll be
Thank
the
you.
cover memo.
so they're back in the consent agenda?
I can't, if I can just.
so you're just
vote
gonna
on
read,
it.
you're gonna read
All those-
both, you're gonna read both titles at the same time?
Sure.
Okay, just read both
And I would
titles
have to
at the
do a
same
vote
time,
for
and then,
both of them individually.
Or you could,
I could just do the
could
vote
do-
now and then read.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item then is the A capital project authorizing resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, selecting AUM Construction Incorporated for the Fernwood Lighting Improvements Project, providing for authorization, providing for implementation, and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
Thank you. And then all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Motion carries. The next item, also from the consent agenda, is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, selecting Kimberly Horn and Associates Incorporated for professional engineering services for the Safe Routes to School project, providing for authorization, providing for implementation, and providing for an effective date.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've pulled this from the consent agenda because it is my understanding, based on the memo, that our Educational Advisory Board made the evaluations of the different bidders and made the recommendation. Is that correct?
No.
Then why does it say?
Well, it was members of the Education Advisory Board that were asked by
It wasn't
the
the,
manager to be a selection.
we could have been a little bit better in the language, but it was members from the committee, not the committee. I will give you specifics.
Okay, just because I think there's a little bit of an issue with the jurisdiction that they have, and I don't, that was not clear. So please explain it to me.
All I'm stating to you is that the staff committee for creating the shortlist was my staff. It was made up of Sergio, Jose, Tony. They were the ones that reviewed it and removed them down to a short list. And then members of, and I've done this frequently where I use like subject matter experts when it comes to committees. I went ahead and used Mr. Davey, Mrs. Kingston, Ms. Lily Warner to rank the short list that came forward to me.
So my concern is, the individuals that are appointed to this committee, their jurisdiction is to study, evaluate, and make recommendations to the village regarding the establishment, modification of compacts or other agreements between the village and Miami-Dade County School District for enhancement and the greater benefit of the public schools that serve the village residents, interaction, ongoing dialogue with the principals of public schools, and accomplishing the goals set out in subsection A1. The board shall not have jurisdiction over or related to any matter concerning duties, employment, performance of the village, Miami-Dade School District, or of the respective employees, or policies or procedures for, and the board shall continue to exist. Okay, so I'm a little concerned that, at least I think when we appoint or make recommendations to people, I don't know that that's their area of expertise, and it just concerned me because this seemed to have, they were engineers.
Who was engineers?
They were evaluating the bids of engineers for
and
schools.
that technical aspect was taken a look at by EAC, but as far as and I do this with committees all the time, maybe wrongly so, but I mean, they're looking at that area of expertise. And as far
what area of expertise?
The school safety issues around the school, the places for sidewalks, the places for curbing. I would go back to members of the school long before I would be making those decisions from my seat here on the second floor of this building. And I've done that before.
I think, though, the issue is that they weren't acting as the Education Advisory Board, and as you nicely read their description of their job, they were acting as a selection committee chosen by the manager. And Chad, do you have the language from the RFQ of who is supposed to be evaluating it?
My concern was putting our wonderful residents on the hook as subject matter experts on safe routes to school. I mean, I think
they are. I mean, they're the ones who found the grants. They're the ones who've been steering it. They've had countless on-site intense meetings with all of the experts from the school district, from the school, from the village. I mean, I don't think there's anyone in the village who knows more about the project than they do. I mean,
no, and I appreciate, we don't know, I mean, it seemed to me like we had a consultant, Joe Corradino, who did Safe Routes to School plan. It was then elaborated upon. I thought.
I observed
without.
That. Obviously, I didn't vote because I wasn't asked to be on the selection committee, but I watched, and it was noticed, I watched the presentations. And
I was there too as well, but I didn't vote. I just wanted to listen as well.
I was impressed with the way they deliberated. I thought they did an excellent job.
Going forward.
Or whatever
I'll tell you, to the outsider who wasn't at that meeting, it just seemed a little strange.
I hope it's more clear.
It is more clear. Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item
We have the consent agenda, I think.
would be the consent agenda. Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, selecting Tetra Tech to update the village's comprehensive emergency management and hurricane plans, providing for authorization and providing for an effective date.
Moved. Second.
It is recommended that the village council approve the agreement between Tetra Tech and the village to provide the professional services to assist on updating the 2006 Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, along with the 2006 Hurricane Plan and other emergency management plans. Local authorities, not federal, have the primary responsibility for preventing, responding to, and recovering from emergencies. It is critically important that all jurisdictions comply with the National Incident Management System. This includes an emergency management plan in support of the village's CEMP and an internal emergency plans that are in examples of the Village of Key Biscayne Hurricane Plan. The funding for this, the funding to provide this professional service is described here and is attached as Exhibit B is in the amount of, and I would like to quickly break away. First of all, we've been in constant negotiations and discussions with Tetra Tech. As of this morning, they reduced the price that is currently in here at $134,555 down to $106,132. That money is being funded through the general fund, the budget fund, and I have representatives from Tetra Tech here to answer any specific questions you have, but as the emergency manager for this community, and as I have been since 1993, the plans and planning need to be reduced to written documents. We last did this in 2006. I think that, and we must, the key part here is that we must update our plans periodically, and those plans must then be presented to Miami-Dade County's Office of Emergency Management to be approved. Otherwise, we do not get the benefit of them coming in and to help us and work with us in the future. So this is more along the lines of for lack of a better word, a formality, but this is the first time about 5 council members have had this action taken, and I would like to, again, let the Tetra Tech experts guide you through if you have specific questions about this.
Before we even get there, Justin, you may have answered it, but your cover memo mentions that this competitive bidding process was exempt from competitive bidding, yet the resolution says the village obtained.
Even though we're exempt, I want to be in the ballpark, because if I just pick somebody without having knowledge of, and we made some phone calls, and more importantly, it's a small little community within the emergency management community, so we know. But I wanted
I
you to.
just needed clarification.
Yes,
Thank you.
we do our due diligence, but it wasn't a requirement on this.
Fair enough.
Eric, anybody want to answer this? Okay.
I only have one. In the body of the proposal, in the first paragraph, where we talk about the background,
yes, sir.
And they describe the work they're going to be doing basically in accordance with industry standards. Is it better to say FEMA standards and the
National Incident Management System?
Yeah.
But isn't that industry or no?
Yes.
Is that considered industry?
I don't think it's just industry. I mean, there's regulatory standards that apply.
Or maybe we should say both, industry and FEMA.
I mean, if you're in the industries, you have to follow the regulations.
But we are targeting this work specifically to comply with FEMA's requirements.
Both FEMA and local. When
So,
I say,
you know, take it as a suggestion, but I think I think it's better expressed if it includes FEMA standards.
Well, FEMA is not an industry, so if you
It's
say
federal.
FEMA and industry standards.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Say both.
I would say if you're going to
Local,
tweak it,
state,
I would
and
say
federal?
local, state, federal, and industry standard.
Okay, that makes more sense.
I'm happy.
John, can you tell us how you managed to get the quick $30,000 savings?
no, I let the fire chief answer. We just.
I'm not looking at give towards in the house. I just.
There was a debris management meeting yesterday out in
Okay.
the county for things, and again, it's a very small network of people, and Tetra Tech has been with us in a number of different opportunities, and this was just one that they wanted to continue with us, and it just came up, and we seized upon it.
Do you all want
Correct.
to add to the scope of your work or what you are looking for?
Is it necessary?
we can move.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Let's move.
Just if they want to add to the scope of, explain the scope of their work, what they will be doing.
Who wants to be the spokesperson for that?
Sure, I can give a quick overview.
Please come to the podium.
My apologies. We are developing 3 different plans. It will be your comprehensive emergency management plan, your disaster debris management plan, and your continuity of operations plans. Also included in that will be an exercise on the debris management plan to prepare you for the upcoming hurricane season. And then following all of those completed plans and exercise, we'll do a training and needs assessment to get you ready for the next couple of years and identifying what training the village needs, as well as the exercises that you should conduct beyond just debris training.
I don't remember, did we do this last year?
No, we haven't, we don't do it every year. We do it about every 5 or 6. So this is almost 10 years old. And regarding what was just explained to you, it can be found on page 10 of 11. There's a breakout of how long the exercise, the whole thing is here as far
28
as
weeks.
the exercises.
And our original intention was to complete the comprehensive emergency management plan and the disaster debris management plan at the same time, and then hopefully do the tabletop exercise in the beginning of hurricane season. I don't think we'll get to it right before hurricane season, but in the beginning, hopefully before
A hurricane
active
comes.
part of the season comes. They are predicting a very active year, so fingers crossed it doesn't come here.
Alice. I have a question with all of these different plans. Do you guys have any experience or possible suggestions that you could give to us in ways that we could effectively utilize like a volunteer force? I know we do a lot ourselves, but when the last storm hit, there were a lot of residents who were interested in helping, and we didn't have a system in place.
Mhm.
And we are the type of community that I think benefits from helping each other and is interested in doing it. If you could
So
talk-
typically, your volunteers is a volunteer and donation management plan, but we do touch upon that in the comprehensive emergency management plan. It just won't go into the level of detail that would be in the volunteer management plan.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, reference to what you were referring to, and also Cecile Sanchez, the program she was referring to is called CERT. It's a Community Emergency Response Team. We did do training on that in this community back in the mid-90s. So that's what she was referring to. I think that's what we're referring to. And volunteerism is sometimes extremely helpful in a small community like this.
Thanks. I'd like to, as we prepare for the next season, talk about maybe doing something like that again. I know there really was a lot of interest, and it's good for the community and other reasons as well.
Yes, ma'am.
One other quick question.
Yes, Katie.
As you go forward with this, one of the things that came out of our last hurricane was the idea that we would establish a relationship with some of the private properties, the condos, and that under certain conditions, FEMA does allow, if there's a safety issue, to go in and clear that in times of an emergency. Will that be included within your plan?
Yes,
Well,
we can absolutely make suggestions. The first is that your ordinance would have to say that you have the responsibility to clear the debris and the health and safety hazard. And then also you would have to have hold harmless agreements with the condo associations that entitle you to go into their condo. And then FEMA or the state of Florida, FEMA and the state of Florida have to approve that private properties are eligible for reimbursement.
And
It's
that's
kind of
why-
a multiple step. Now, of course, the village can make their own decision and say, we're going to do it, and we'll eat the cost if we have to, but
That'll come up in
and
about
we can
7
walk
minutes.
you through that process.
But that will be part of this also?
The debris management plan will be part of the hurricane plan and the overall SEMP, because it's not always a hurricane that would give us debris and things of that nature. So yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Wanted to talk to this? Also, members, presidents, condominium presidents council.
I'm Donald Ellisberg. I live at 177 Ocean Lane Drive. And I am here in my capacity as the Executive Director of the Condominium Presidents Council. I had not intended to speak on this subject tonight. I had been assured of some things that I did not hear tonight, so I want to make sure they are clear.
Yes.
Our condo association believes that this is an extremely important agreement and contract to get done. We have absolutely no problem with that. We think it's timely, and I hope they get it done fast and so forth. However, there are several points that we have made that we would like assurances are going to be taken care of or discussed. One is that Ignacio Segurola has sent formal letters to the village with drafts of what we believe could be these hold harmless or collection agreements or whatever you want to call it of the debris. I thought we were being assured that was going to be considered, but I did not hear that. The second point I want to make is that we have come with a forum. We have participated in your hurricane workshop. We have made over and over a number of points that we believe need to be involved in these plans and discussions, including some of the evacuation issues, including mandatory evacuation, including the bridge issue, and so on and so forth. And we asked that we be involved in the participation as stakeholders in putting this plan together. We did not want to be presented with a fait accompli. And it was my understanding that under this agreement, we would have a opportunity as one of your stakeholders to participate with this contractor or whoever in discussing the issues we would like addressed in this plan. And all I want and all we would like is an assurance that we will not be presented with a signed copy one morning and say, well, what do you think?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Call the question?
Excuse me?
Call the question?
Yes, please.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, adopting the new building zoning and planning fee schedule, repealing the building zoning and planning fee schedule approved by resolution number 2017-18 and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
Thank you.
You moved in second. I'll say a quick comment after our manager.
Yes, Mr. Manager.
If I may, it is recommended that the council approve the attached resolution for the updated fee schedule. The attached fee schedule contains permit fee recommendations based in part on the results of the permit fee analysis conducted by the village's hired consultants. While the primary focus of the deliberations were the main base permit fees, the updated fee schedule contains a full list of all fees assessed by the various processes performed by those departments and divisions involved in the permitting process. The fee schedule document has been significantly enhanced and reduced in size due to the new and more efficient way of assessing fees. Some permit fees have now been configured to be all-inclusive, which have become more efficient to apply and easier to understand. In addition, the fee schedule has been reorganized to be sure that the more comprehensive and logically laid out. The new layout flows parallel with the sequence of the permitting process so that the retained fees can be easily found. And I would like to ask for permission to enter into the record the response to the gentleman who put forth a document earlier this evening about some concerns that he had. Those were answered immediately this morning upon people coming into work, and they will be part of the record to go along with this evening. I can now answer questions.
I want to thank you for getting this done.
We're trying
really
to get
do.
this kicked off April 25th. This gives us the time now to get back in, to do the things necessary to bring the computer programming up to date and move forward with it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The only thing I wanted to add is that we should monitor it, just to see how it's going every quarter. And if we have to make some adjustments, we can. But
I can look you right in the eye and know that we have not covered everything because we have not been exposed to everything, but this will be, and the exception rules will be communicated to the council as we start making little tweaks to the process.
Thank you.
And the data collection is there. It's going to be easy to have the
As what we learned,
data and the analytics.
as what we learned at the budget workshop with council, these quarterly reports will have the information that you're seeking.
Okay, and I understand that when our director came on board, that there was some difficulty quantifying some of the permits, I believe. Has that been addressed? Or quantify, there were issues with some quantifying of activity and permits and what have you?
Well, this will help standardize and drive some consistency because the fees are now much easier to apply. The new permit program will help us automate where we just enter a figure, whether it's an area or a cost, and the permit program will automatically figure the permit fee out for us. So that'll greatly enhance. And just for clarification, we do want to make the effective date April 23rd. It's a Monday.
Okay.
My fault.
That'll give us some time to program the new fees and make sure that they're properly working.
Thank you. And a shout out to Councilmember Holloway. I think you heard data and analytics in one sentence.
Finally.
One quick question. All of the comments that Judd sent, was there anything that you thought we needed to tweak here? Or
No,
you
no,
feel comfortable?
It's all covered.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Including the traffic studies and what have you?
Yeah, the current fee schedule does not maintain that, and that's normally done during a site plan review. That is part of the conditions that are imposed on that.
And so at that
project.
point, that cost is
And any other
incurred.
costs.
And any other, so
Yes.
there's a great, terrific.
One question, my only question. The early start authorization is different depending on the size of the job.
Yes.
Why is that? And I ask anticipating an answer, because we've been trying to get away from value-based differentials that don't correlate to differences in work that are required.
That is a different nature. That's actually a great tool in the building code that it allows for a project, even before the official permit being issued, to start some preliminary work. And the reason for the difference is the larger the project, the more we have to review as to what is it that we're giving permission to prior to that official permit.
You've answered my question.
And that's something we currently don't have in the current fee schedule, but it's very helpful.
Sounds good.
But also, I just noticed that there's a reference to Resolution 2017-18 in the title and the first whereas clause. It really should be 2017-19. So just the resolution, the motion should be as amended.
Thank you. All those in favor for the, I'm sorry.
Also to include the effective date of April
Of the
23rd.
23rd.
The amendments, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's after 10 o'clock, so if we may move to the village manager's report. First item is to provide direction regarding bidding or renegotiate the Ashbrook contract for emergency disaster debris removal and response services. Mr. Manager.
Yes. As I have stated before, even with all the conversations that took place immediately after the Hurricane Irma, it was necessary for me to continue by my desire to keep a debris management company available to us. Ashbrook has been our debris management company for a number of years. It was certainly our debris management company over the Hurricane Irma and remains to this day as my emergency debris removal company. I could seek, and I am seeking, some additions. It was very clear that council had some ideas about what they thought regarding Hurricane Irma's pickup by Ashbrook. I can do one of two things, and I'm seeking direction this evening. We can go out for an RFP, and we can begin from scratch, or we can sit down with Ashbrook, with the council's approval, and sit and try and renegotiate a contract that is favorable to the community. Ashbrook has representatives here this evening to be specific. Otherwise, like I say, we can go back out and we can start all over again with the knowledge that Ashbrook could come back in and bid. So I'm trying to make it easy, but I'm also trying to adhere to the council's wishes.
So I'm going to have Luis and then Gary, and I'll speak as well.
Yeah, we definitely have to do something. So the question is, do we go for an RFP? I think that is the smart way of doing it. And when we do an RFP, we need to make sure that we have the particular requirements that we want to put into a contract that would require the bidders to understand that that would be required. And I think that having Irma as a recent experience is something that could be very valuable for us, because we know how much volume of debris we picked up over the days that we picked it up. And I think we know what we can expect from a contractor to have to promise to do. And the contract, obviously, will be looked at very, very closely by all of us, but in particular by our attorney, to make sure that it allows us to, it gives us flexibility in the event that they cannot do what the contract requires them to do, because we can't find ourselves in the same situation when we were the last time. With all due respect to Ashbridge, I was very disappointed with what we had to go through in order to finally, and if it hadn't been for the state of Florida's governor and the attorney general stepping in, it would cost us a lot of money. And so, frankly, I think we need to go with an RFP. We need to go with a new set of companies and see what they come back with, and make sure that we tell them what it is that we require in order to enter into a contract, or not enter into a contract. I'm not sure. I don't think that we have to have a contract in order to be reimbursed by FEMA.
You do not need to. However, the FEMA guidelines do recommend that you go and do a pre-disaster
Because
bid.
at the end of the day, they're going to, we know how it works now. The truckers are going to go with whoever pays them the most money.
It depends.
Well, unless we require a bond.
Well, yeah, I think that it may be useful to have a discussion on that point. I think a bond is one possible way. Paying a monthly retainer is another possible way. I mean, there are ways to guarantee through those.
Okay, well, we'll see. I'm willing to listen to you to come up with, with the right things, but which certainly has to be different than last year, for sure.
I totally agree. We need to go out for an RFP. I think by the grace of, we could have ended up in really bad shape for two reasons. Number one, the provisions that were in that contract that could have really backfired on us. But even more important to me, Ashcroft is a broker. They don't have any of their own. Ashbrett is a broker. Sorry about that. And they don't have any of their own employees. They don't have any of their own equipment, and they're relying totally on subs. And those are the kind of people that will chase the dollars when an emergency happens. So I believe that we should try to look for companies that do have their own resources, at least some of their own resources in-house, so that they have more control over them, and they're not at the mercy of subcontractors, putting us at the mercy of subcontractors, which could put us in a really bad position.
Okay. We are in the middle of April. Hurricane season starts May 1st.
June 1st.
June 1st. We don't have a lot of time for an RFP. And hindsight being 2020, we were frustrated, we were scared, we were concerned. But as it turns out, Key Biscayne was probably one of the first municipalities to be completely cleaned and have services. Ashbridge had some issues. It was the perfect storm in terms of using as many resources as were available as possible. It was hard to get boots on the ground. But that first day when we came across the causeway, we were greeted by 2 Ashbridge trucks that stayed here the whole time, and they paved the ways. And I agree the contract we used, which was the standard contract, is not good and needs has challenges, and it's something I would suggest in the meantime. We need to renegotiate and address to get better terms, what the resources are that can be committed, we need more solid details and commitments and terms. But we did go to RFP. I believe they have 3 years left on their contract, John. John has on numerous occasions said that they are actually we've used them for years, and that they've been extremely responsive.
If there's no storms, there's no way
Well, but no,
And we had a storm and we had to act, and we put ourselves out in a position that it was going to cost us a significant amount of money had it not been for our governor and our attorney general. So, it couldn't be clearer to me.
John, were they used or were they just, on standby? Please give us your experience.
Allow me to introduce, for those of you that don't know him, State Representative Jared Moskowitz. He is also the Executive Vice President of Ashbridge. He is intimately involved in our issues and our concerns. And if you don't mind, would you give an overview of that very snapshot period of time, those first 4 to 5 days, and what you did for the community and some of the misperceptions that's out there about how this community was treated?
Sure, Mr. Manager. First of all, I'm here in my, obviously, professional capacity, not in my hobby. Jared Moskowitz, I'm General Counsel of Ashbridge, 565 East Hillsborough Boulevard, Deerfield Beach, Florida. Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, Mr. City Administrator, first of all, thank you for allowing me to address the Commission. Ashbridge is one of the nation's largest disaster management companies. We are not a broker. In fact, all of the disaster management companies in the entire country have their own equipment, but they also use subcontractors. There's not a single one that has their own equipment. There's not a single one that could serve the entire country with their own equipment. The reason you chose us when this was rebid a year ago, when you did a comprehensive national search, is because we have executed the nation's largest disaster management cleanup in U.S. history, which was cleaning up the entire state of Mississippi after Katrina, which was a $900 million cleanup. It was a 25 million cubic yard cleanup for the Army Corps of Engineers. We recently cleaned up half of the state of California after the terrible fires in Sonoma for the Corps as well. Key Biscayne is different than Hialeah. It's different than Doral. You have unique challenges here. Irma is not going to be your typical storm. You were barely hit by Irma. If you guys got a direct hit, you would not be worried about vegetative debris sitting in people's yards. You would be worried about mass evacuations. You would be worried about the bridge being out. You would be worried about ice, water, power generation. And so we are a full turnkey disaster management company. Additionally, while Irma was a historic event, we have to look at Irma and Harvey in combination. Never in U.S. history have 2 Category 4 storms hit simultaneously, 40-plus counties in Texas, 50-plus counties in Florida. The nation ran out of equipment. Ashbridge didn't run out of equipment. The nation ran out of equipment. We would like to be afforded the opportunity before you would make the decision, delaying it one meeting, to sit down with staff and see if we can't take your concerns and issues that arouse from the last cleanup and put it in an amendment in the contract. I will say this, out of all the companies that got increases from their clients during Irma, and every single national disaster management company got increases from their clients, Ashbridge was the only one not to accept any of those increases, including in Key Biscayne. Every other competitor accepted those increases. So if you were to go out to RFP, you're going to select another company just like us, who had the same performance issues just like us, just in a different place, and also accepted the increases we did not. I'm not here to defend our performance. I'm here to say that that is not typical of our performance of the last 25 years, which is why we've become one of the nation's largest and why the U.S. government depends on us. We humbly request to be afforded the opportunity to fix those issues in the contract via an amendment, whether they're performance standards, whether they're liquidated damages, whatever those issues are. Should you not be happy with that, you then could go out to RFP. We would just be allowed the opportunity. And I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
Frank, and then Luis.
Thank you for, first of all, it's a helpful reminder in terms of the details that we were contending with in the aftermath of Irma. I think you've spoken accurately from my point of view, my memory of the event. Specifically, we were a bit mystified about some contract language that made Ashbridge's commitment a little soft. Okay, so, and I think that's, if you agree with that observation, that's a very easy thing to fix. And I think it's a good suggestion to do what you have proposed. I'd like to encourage us to do exactly that. and come back the next time. We have 2 weeks before our next meeting. See what we get to.
How long will an RFP process take?
Well, I think that
If we came back on April 24th and we said,
you want it to go issued out, we could probably have it issued in a couple of days after that, depending on changes made. And then you want to allow just for a reasonable time for people to respond. So probably 30 days at the shortest, and then selection.
so we would be into hurricane season before we selected the.
We'll be at Memorial Day.
And then, yeah, but we'd have to negotiate a contract. Well, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't, let me ask you a question. How many trucks does Ashbridge own, debris removal trucks like the ones that came to Key Biscayne?
Yeah, so through a number of subsidiaries, Sure, Councilman. So through a number of subsidiaries that we own, depending on the type of truck, the answer is we have over 50 pieces of equipment dedicated here in the state of Florida at any point in time. But going back to the point is that there is nobody in the industry that owns enough equipment to serve all of their clients when they all get hit at once, which has never happened in the United States history.
All of their clients is a lot more clients than I'm worried about. I'm only worried about this client, and if we do an RFP and we agree to pay a certain amount of money, maybe we have to pay a premium for it or whatever, and we agree, and we find a way to bond it or somehow, Key Biscayne is the only one that we're worried about, not the rest of your clients, and what we went through collectively here this past time when we had to deal with the situation was unforgivable. I mean, with all due respect, I'm glad you came because we had a meeting here in this chamber, and no one from your firm showed up, and it was all about you. So that was extremely disheartening to everybody that was here. And then what the response that we got was that you were going to charge us twice as much as what we had contracted for. And if it wasn't because of our governor and our attorney general that subpoenaed your records and basically made you think it over again, did you then decide that you were going to go back to your original contract? But you had already told us you were going to double our fee. And you weren't even allowing us to hire other contractors that were sitting in the audience waiting. They said, we can have the trucks here tomorrow. We have 10 trucks we can bring here tomorrow. And we had to hire them through you, which would have been okay if we were paying the same amount of money. I don't care where they come from, but you were going to charge us twice as much. That's what we forget. See, we can't forget that, and I'm not going to forget it. So we need to keep that in mind. And and going for an RFP process is really risky if we're waiting for that. If you all want to wait 2 more weeks before we make a decision, fine. But as far as I'm concerned, unless that contract gets totally redone and we have a bond that secures performance, I can't agree to continue this.
Councilman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
First of all, let's answer the questions. A bond would not be an issue. I would also recommend liquidated damages as well, because both go hand in hand. It also would be compliant with 2 CFR 200. I don't want to forget. We haven't forgotten. We sent you a letter asking for an increase. We're not here to deny that. But in that letter, if you go down to the last paragraph, it specifically says that if such a time arises that Ashford believes it does not need the increase, we will come back to you and tell you that we don't need the increase. And 2 weeks later, we did just that. And we were the only company to do that in the entire industry. And so we can say it was for this reason or that reason. There were lots of reasons that wound up happening. As far as not being able to take any additional companies that came here and said that they have pieces of equipment, yeah, of course, every company that was looking to take away a contract had all equipment. Of course, there was none when companies like myself tried to put them to work. But they could work for us. It's not that we prohibited it, it's FEMA prohibits it. See, sole sourcing work to a company is prohibited. It violates 2 CFR 200, it violates the Stafford Act. You have to go to competitive procurement. I know DEM sent out some guidance during the storm saying you could just go give a contract out to a company. It's not true. You would be in compliance with DEM policy, you would not be in compliance with FEMA. And as far as the RFP process, you could have a 2-week turnaround. I would tell you out of the probably 80 RFPs, ITBs, RFQs that come out every year, there's a mixture of timelines, but I would say 2 weeks is actually pretty standard, if that would answer your concern.
2 weeks for what?
A turnaround, allowing a vendor to respond. Your city attorney suggested that you could.
Oh, you mean for the RFP?
Yeah.
I think that, look, you as the council can decide any time frame. I think that the reason why I said 30 days, because if you do 2 weeks, you'd be accused of not allowing people enough time to respond in an appropriate time frame.
I get it.
Brett, and then Katie, and then Gary.
So I think after Hurricane Irma, I was reading a lot, I don't remember which communities they were, but I was reading a lot of reports or articles that Ashbrook left certain communities without anything, and that they even had signed contracts with and things like that. And I understand the scenario that was happening, what happened. It was huge. But how did Ashbrook decide on who to honor the contract and who to kind of abandon, and how did that happen? Because that worried me a lot of how Ashbrook operates.
Councilman, that's a fair question. So I will tell you, and some of those obviously are in litigation, so I can't comment on the matters in those particular issues. But what I would say to you is Ashbrook didn't abandon anybody or leave any client. As I explained, depending upon when operations started and when equipment was moving, the country ran out of trucks. And so when that happened, and there's a particular type of truck that you want to use that you had in Key Biscayne here, right? It's the truck that you see with a grapple on it. Well, when the country ran out of that, companies like myself and all of my competitors had to get creative. And we brought in dump trucks with separate loaders. Well, there are certain cities and counties that work in, and there's certain don't, depending on the streets, how long the hauls are. And so we did not abandon Key Biscayne. Obviously, as Councilman De La Cruz said, talking about other cities or counties or what we did there is not for today. But I can tell you, in the 25 years we've been in business, the challenges that were faced by Ashbrook and everyone else in the industry from Irma and Harvey is something we've never seen before. It's something that the Army Corps of Engineers and all their models never planned for. It's something that the governor of the state didn't plan for, the Weather Channel didn't plan for, historical records don't account for. So the likelihood of everything happening again and being a general fighting the last war is probably zero. But we will now plan for Harvey and an Irma.
But I think my question was, how do you make the decision on who gets the equipment first and who doesn't? Is it based on how much they're paying per cubic yard?
So not to give you a complicated answer, but it is slightly complicated. So as you know, you have a disaster management company and you have a monitor. So what happened is, depending upon who did their push and who was completed in their push, and then who had their monitoring firm in place and whose monitors were here, and then who had a DMS site identified and had a DMS site opened, certain jobs started earlier depending upon who was organized and who wasn't. And by the time certain areas got ready to start right-of-way work, remember, the country didn't run out of grinders for DMS, right? The country didn't run out of dump trucks to haul out of the DMS. They ran out of right-of-way equipment, picking it up from the right-of-way after you pushed it. So depending upon when right-of-way started in that particular city or county is depending on the timeline of when there was no equipment available.
Thank you.
There was no process or methodology. No one sat there with a map and said, we like these folks or didn't like these folks, just to give a blunt answer.
It wasn't contractual either.
It was not.
Okay.
Katie, Gary, and then Allison.
Okay, thank you for coming. I remember things slightly different than Councilmember De La Cruz, and yes, we absolutely were trying to clear our streets and get things back as quickly as possible, and there was a shortage, and it wasn't just a shortage in our community, it was throughout the entire state and Texas. And your trucks were here right away, your large trucks. And to me, the things that really came forward were some of the concerns of the fact that the contract didn't allow for a lesser storm to have a shorter time of pickup. So you were managing the worst case scenario in that contract. And that we would like to rectify that. The trucks that you had available were the large trucks, and they don't go down our little streets. So that was another issue. We used your subcontractor. We took a leap of faith and paid them the going rate. And I mean, the one thing that I've learned from every hurricane I've seen is the situation never gets replicated. We don't know what we're facing in the future, but all we can do is try to make this tighter. And I don't disagree with the idea of giving you a chance and speaking to our community and the people that, you know, by and large, our community did a tremendous job, and I haven't lost sight of that. We were cleaned up faster than I think almost anybody in Dade County, and you were a big part of that. But we do know that part of that, it didn't have to go that way, and your contract didn't hold you to that either. And then we had to make some steps in order to sort of supplement what you'd done, and it all worked out quite well, I thought, at the end of the day. So I would just ask that
Very short.
that you be understanding of how we want to fine tune this and really try to customize it.
We are, and we are willing to do so.
Okay.
Thank you. And Gary, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant. I think clearly if we focused on what happened instead of what could have happened, we have to say thank you and be grateful. I don't want to ever be in a position again where we have to deal with what could happen. I don't see anything wrong with you working with the manager and trying to renegotiate your contract while at the same time we go out for an RFP. I don't think it has to be one after the other. And if you are able to satisfy our concerns and you're the best company and you already have a contract, there's no reason we don't continue to use it. But at the same time, in order to save time, because of the date it is, we should go out and look to see what's out there. No harm in that, right?
Chad?
Don't we have to review them all and?
Well,
yeah.
Can I ask a
Yes, of course.
So I understand that would logical sense to try to compress the time frame. But we could simultaneously be working on amendment on our contract as they prepare the RFP. And if we don't come to terms, you're not happy with the terms, then you'd have one ready to put out immediately rather than getting one ready. Soliciting it while we're negotiating means I'm negotiating contract with you and potentially bidding again simultaneously. I don't even know how we could do that.
Well,
I mean,
let's see how quickly you can negotiate and change the contract.
I think that it should take you a short time to negotiate what we need to negotiate. You know, I mean, you can either do it or you can't. You know, I mean, and the bond, I think he's already said that they're receptive to it. So we need a bond. We need a bond in this contract. We need to make sure that whoever we contract with is going to perform. You know?
So there are examples of using a bond, and we're happy to negotiate with Mr. Moskowitz and Ashbridge. I think that those bonds, and maybe Mr. Moskowitz can talk to it, are really tied to a performance standard based on a hypothetical storm and a cost. Because remember, you have no idea what this service is going to cost you, right? It really depends on so we would need, and I think that Eric also has some information that, you know, we can negotiate that and we'll come back, but I think that ultimately the amount of the bond would be based upon a hypothetical cost of a storm. That's how it's typically done.
Well, okay, so we already know that storm that we can refer to, and that is the storm that we should plan for. And the amount of debris that we got from that storm, we already, I mean, if a worse storm comes, then you know, it is what it is.
They're willing to agree to that. You're right. We could, you know, do a bond based upon what we paid.
Well, the amount of trucks that we had here, the amount of trucks and the amount of equipment that they finally came through with a week or two after we started the work, I think that that's something that we should require.
I mean, look, we can base our numbers off of that.
But what if it's worse?
So, exactly. We can do cubic
What's that?
yards.
Shouldn't you do the worst case?
Yeah, I mean, but the worst case scenario could be a catastrophic.
180 days.
Right. You can't.
It's 180
Yes,
days
please.
with the same amount
Yes.
of
Yes.
Madam Mayor, so I'm happy to answer that question. So
Yes.
typically, the way you would do a bond, and it's a performance bond, is you would just set a number, right? You would say, we want a $500,000 bond, we want $1 million bond, but the bond will increase if your work goes beyond that number exponentially. So if you do $2 million worth of work, you send us a $2 million bond. If you're doing $3 million, you send us $3 million. So you start with a number because you don't know what the event is going to be. If we do it to Irma and you have twice the amount, then your bond is not going to cover you. Additionally, and you, by the way, can use the Army Corps of Engineer models. We have sent staff the Army Corps of Engineer models, depending upon if it was a Cat 1, a Cat 2, a Cat 3, and higher, what you would be dealing with here in Key Biscayne. Irma was a veg storm. You had almost no C&D. Category 3 storm, be a totally different story.
Yeah, but we had much more vegetation damage than we probably should have had, you know, and that took up a lot of the.
It's been 11 years since we had a storm, so a lot of vegetation is built up. Additionally, not to be your counsel, but I want to make sure that your concerns are heard and are met. A performance bond, coupled with liquidated damages, which is compliant with 2 CFR 200, liquidated damages are now required is part of 2 CFR 200 if you were to rebid your contract. So if you were to rebid, you'd have to put them in. We're more than happy to incorporate it, and the reason I say this is they go hand in hand because a performance bond is, by the time you collect on that performance bond, this is well over with. Where liquidated damages are immediate, and they can be deducted from the amount that is owed to us. And a performance bond is if we don't show up. Liquidated damages is if we don't meet some sort of metric.
I know exactly what that is.
Yeah, so we are more than happy. We have a number of examples to give to your staff for them to examine. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is already out there to see that what you guys would like to incorporate as an amendment that allies your fears so that you don't run into those issues in the future.
So I think
Allison,
I think Gary's suggestion is very well taken. I mean, we should start putting together the RFP and then negotiate with
Let's Allison and then Gary, and then we can have that discussion. Allison?
Well, Councilmember De La Cruz just kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I would like to try to renegotiate this contract because as I remember that night, my knuckles are still a little raw. We really were upset about the contract. And we need to make sure that we're not in that situation again. I think that we should give Ashbridge the opportunity to renegotiate because they were here that first day and they did get it done in the end. But it is absolutely imperative that it be the right contract. I think you should get the opportunity because the relationship is there and you were here. But we cannot be in that situation again. And I think at the same time, if we want to be developing an RFP so that if we are not satisfied, we're good to go and we can move things quickly, that's fine.
Gary.
I wanted to ask you a question just for information purposes, something you alluded to about 3 hours ago. You have the capability, if unfortunately we did get a direct hit by a major hurricane and we had huge massive flooding and maybe a bridge out and all this other potential nightmare, and you have capabilities, Ashbridge had capabilities that other companies don't, what are some of those capabilities? What if we did have a worst case scenario? What could you do?
So that's a great question. And so the reason I brought that up is after Irma, there were a lot of subcontractors or other companies that had never been in the disaster management business before that wanted to get into it and may have had some equipment lying around because this storm in Miami-Dade and in Broward and in Palm Beach and in basically every other county other than Collier County, Lee County, and Monroe was a vegetative pickup, right? That's all it was. It was brush. Key Biscayne being unique, the reason why your staff selected us and why we've been your vendor is because we are a full turnkey disaster management company. What I mean by that is, so we are a core contractor. For the core, we have to be able to prove that we can deal with all sorts of other situations. We're here, the bridge could be out. So we can set up man camps. So in Monroe County, we set up a man camp to house, feed, clothe, laundry facilities, dining facilities, showers, bathrooms, 1,000 people. We set that up in Monroe after Irma. You could need something similar here. If the bridge was out, we have the ability to bring barges in to get debris out from Key Biscayne. Because before emergency vehicles or things get in, we have to get the roads clear. So before we can barge in emergency vehicles, potentially, we have to clear the roads and barge that stuff out. ice, water, power generation. Wilma, we had no power for 2 weeks, right? Then we made all these changes after Wilma, and then guess what? Irma wasn't a power issue. But here, the whole island could be out without power. The whole key could have no power. And so we have to be able to barge in, thinking that the bridge might be out, megawatt generators to get up shelters so that life and health could be protected. We have a contract with the state of Virginia that has 6,000 line items down to hamster food and dog food if we had to shelter people's pets. And so I bring that up not to impress upon you that we're so amazing. I bring that up because in Key Biscayne, different than other areas, the reason why we've been your vendor is because we have a proven record on delivering on these other ancillary items that some unique areas of the country could need. It's why we did the entire cleanup after Sandy in New Jersey, because we had that unique experience of dealing with cleaning up an entire island. Long Beach Island was devastated after Sandy. So that's why I brought it up.
Well, I'd like to see that as part of your contract. If we did have that kind of state of emergency, that you would be able to and willing to provide that kind of service and give us an idea of what the cost might be.
Understood.
Put that into your contract?
Yeah, you can incorporate a bunch of ancillary items.
Well, the contract has a lot of ancillary.
Our current contract did include a lot of those items.
But it wasn't very specific.
No, it was specific in the schedule, in the exhibit to the contract, did spell out all these, I think there was water, ice, maybe tents.
We included a whole ancillary list in addition to the bid sheet.
That's correct.
Do you own those assets?
Nobody owns every asset for all of those line items.
So again, we get back to whether we're lucky enough to be the first guys that you service. I'm wondering how we get around that particular, because as far as I know, and the research that I did, you don't really have a lot of assets. You have a lot of contracts, and those are your assets, but you don't really own that many trucks, and you don't have barges, and you don't have all that kind of stuff. You have the capability of contracting with other parties, but.
But Luis, I think the challenge we have is that no competitor.
Well, I don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know that.
Well, I proffer for you that what I said into the record is an accurate statement. Halliburton doesn't own all of that equipment. Ultimately, all of those ancillary services, different from right-of-way trucks, is completely different.
Somebody owns a certain amount of equipment.
Sure,
they're not all mom and pop operations.
No, of course.
Have their own trucks.
Sure, there are companies that own barges, but those companies don't also own right-of-way trucks. There are companies that own massive amounts of water, but they also don't own grinders. There are companies that own base camps, but they also don't own haul-out trucks. What I'm saying to you is the reason why this industry is set up the way it is and has been set up since Hurricane Andrew is because there are so many potential services depending upon the event that you hire a company under umbrella so that you're not looking at 15 different contracts with 15 different vendors and 15 different RFP processes for all of these different services.
I think we've come to a place where we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Do you need any more guidance from us?
Yeah, I need some direction. I've heard a lot of discussion about renegotiation as well as preparing the RFP. I need some, and John needs some direction also, to come back on the 24th with something.
Okay, so do we have to get specific then?
No, I just which, if you guys want to, we can engage in a renegotiation and prepare an RFP and try to bring both of them for the 24th.
Do it.
That's what we want you to do, right?
Yeah.
I definitely want to renegotiate the contract.
If you want, I don't know whether you all still have notes of the contract. I have my notes. I'll give them to you.
Can you send, I'm sure I have it somewhere, but can you send me a copy of the contract, please, tomorrow? And we'll all send you our notes.
Jenny, can you see
I can tell you things that you need to renegotiate. The time to perform needs to be renegotiated, and you need to have the liquidated damages and the bonding capacity, and
I think that we can sit down and come to a variety of different things we'd like to do differently in that agreement, based upon our experience. I think those obviously are included. So we.
Send us a copy of the contract so we can all.
Yeah, I think if Jenny, because she has the official copy with the exhibit, the
I
whole
will circulate
contract,
it.
because I know sometimes it was circulated without the exhibit. So to be clear, we are going to engage on a negotiation and at the same time to renegotiate with Ashbrit and try to bring an agreement forward on the 24th, as well as have an RFP as a, before you guys to make, just to look at.
So we could say, let's go with it on the 24th if it doesn't work out.
Okay.
Is that fair?
That sounds fair. Quick question. So we're using the word renegotiation. We're really just talking about obviously
We're going to do an amendment to the contract.
A contract amendment.
Yes.
If that contract amendment, which obviously will be available to everyone here beforehand, I assume there'll be a vote on the contract amendment before a vote on going out to RFP.
The way that it will be set up is on the agenda, the contract amendment will be by resolution, which will be under item 9. And typically, the manager will put the RFP under him and just get an authority to go out, which will be later in the agenda.
That's my intention.
Perfect. That works for me.
If we get to it.
So in answer to your question, that's, yes, that there'll be a discussion on the agreement first.
And I think we can say, even if we get to 10,
Yeah,
we'll make sure
we
that we
can-
do the contract before we have a discussion about that.
So one other quick clarification. So if we do, if we have an amendment that council is happy with and the village is happy with, then you will not be going out to RFP.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Is Michael your father?
He is. Is that good or bad?
It's good.
Okay. That's why I hesitated.
Tell him hello.
I definitely will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Next item, police and policy discussion on right of entry onto private property for debris removal.
To wrap up, Council Mayor, if I may, to wrap up the last 2 months of dealing with emergency management activities, although it's the last one to be heard tonight, it's the most important one, and that was the discussions that we have been having about private entry onto gated communities, right-of-ways. The village attorney and staff have been working very, very hard on the right of entry agreement. We have come up with something that you have in front of you. You have both the letter for participation and you have a copy of the draft ordinance. And as we have done in the past, these two things are in your possession right now so that you can look them over and give me feedback backwards. I'm sorry that Ignacio left, but we have addressed a lot of his issues. We've used, based on the recommendation from the village attorney, the FEMA forms with a little bit of doctoring up so that everything looks the same. We don't want to get hung up later on down the road because forms didn't look right or there was technicalities. It is our intention to have the hurricane meeting earlier this year, and I have directed staff, and we are committed to work with the condominiums and anybody else who needs specific help in preparing documents so that everybody is online by June 1st.
If I could just add a couple of things. So what this ordinance does is it provides a process in which the village manager can then engage upon private debris removal if there's certain findings that are met. The findings that are included on here, one is there has to be a declaration of state of emergency. 2, there has to be declared in the public's interest. And 3, that there has to be a severe threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the village, as well as the economy at large of the village. Those criteria come straight out of FEMA. And what we tried to do was basically set this up as if the village were going to seek FEMA reimbursement for private debris removal. Now, the one thing that is not in here, which was alluded to a little bit earlier tonight by the Tetra Tech consultant, is that generally under FEMA rules, the village would need to seek their approval first before going on to private property and doing private debris removal. This is set up to allow the manager, if he or she so chooses, to engage on the private debris removal if the findings are in place without seeking the FEMA approval first. So in other words, the village would then be subject to maybe not receiving reimbursement from FEMA for private debris removal. However, what we set up is the protocols that are FEMA consistent to try to basically put the process in place. And hopefully, if an event occurs and the village decides to go on to private property and do debris removal prior to FEMA approval, that we would have all the protocols already in place, that they would say, okay, we know you didn't seek our approval first, but you did follow our procedures and steps, and the necessary findings were put in place. So that's what this ordinance does. Now, what it also does, it requires the private property owners to enter into a right-of-way, a right of entry, indemnification, and hold harmless, and a no duplication of benefits agreement. That's what we've been talking about, the waivers that FEMA requires. What Ignacio had sent around was the Form FEMA agreement, which we were planning on providing to you as an example anyways, which is here in front of you, because there's no reason to differ from what FEMA has already dictated, because we're just trying to make everything set up to be FEMA compliant in the event that, you know, the village then seeks reimbursement for private debris removal. So I think John's intention is to bring both of these items before you on the 24th and for a first reading.
Okay.
Brett, you had a question?
Well, I think this is a very important issue that we need to deal with, and those requirements for FEMA, is that the same requirements that we have in order to clean the public swales as well? That it has to have a severe threat
No,
to life safety?
the village doesn't have to make those similar findings. The reason being is that the general law is that you cannot expend public dollars on private property. However, there's an exception for when you find that there is such a need in the public's interest or such a threat to health, safety, and welfare. So that's why FEMA makes you go through that additional step before you can do it, which, by the way, under Florida law, it's the same process. Maybe, you know, you would just state it's in the health, safety, and welfare, but it's the same thing. Under Florida law, you cannot expend public dollars for a private purpose unless you make those findings.
So the way that I think that this should be handled is that we should go for FEMA to go on private property. But if there's a reason that we can't get FEMA, it shouldn't stop us from taking care of residents that need to be taken care of. I think that's something that we need to look at as a policy to do that. And the reason why I say it is because houses have the ability, and which actually happens, maybe not supposed to, but all the houses just drag their stuff in the front yard and it gets picked up. The condos, the large ones, really are at a disadvantage because they cannot pull all their stuff up to the swale and just dump a pile that would actually cover Crandon, which would create a huge...
But that's what this is for.
Exactly. So, but I'd want to make sure that it's not just for FEMA reimbursement.
No. That's why I explained that. That's why I explained that this is setting up a process to allow you to go forward and do this.
To have the best chance.
To have the best chance without...
Okay.
You're just going to make a policy
Just
decision.
want to make sure.
We want to do it. And you know what? If we get FEMA reimbursement,
Okay, perfect.
great. Because if you wait, it's going to be a couple weeks. Who knows how long it's going to take? So
Yes.
that's...
Sounds good.
The same way we did it this time. We went, we picked up, and we dotted all our i's, crossed our t's, and hoped we would get reimbursed.
Yes, but we did not pick up in the private property though.
That's
This
correct.
allows us
Now,
to do
what this
that. Not
also
in
does,
the-
it doesn't,
gated
one thing I will
communities, the other
say
kind
is,
of, yes.
this does not limit you only to residential. You could do it on commercial also. Now, FEMA reimbursement on commercials, not going to happen. But we didn't want to preclude you because we're such a small island and, you know, our commercial businesses really do serve our community here. So we put that in here just in case too.
Can I ask the sort of declaration of emergency requirements, is it typically acceptable for FEMA reimbursement for that to be declared by us? Or do we really need like a state of Florida, a county declaration?
No, it would be specific to the village.
Like the way we did last time?
Because you could get FEMA reimbursement. Think about it for a specific, maybe a fire or some other disaster that's Key Biscayne specific that, you know, you end up seeking, maybe the hurricane only, you know, really swipes Key Biscayne and then, you know, something like that. So.
Okay.
Next.
Next item is a motion to authorize the manager to issue a request for proposals for holiday decorations. Mr. Ray.
Second.
Councilman, as you may recall, this year we moved the Winterfest from the Village Green to the Civic Center. After trying the new location successfully, we are now going out to bid to make the move with holiday decor in the Civic Center with the goal of creating an aesthetic similar to that of the Merrick Village. This is the proposal. We're going to send it out, but I mean, it's time to update our Christmas decorations and put them in a bit different location. So this is information unless you have a concern.
It was moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is for informational purposes only, sustainability report for the month of March.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. And that concludes the manager's
The next,
tie-up
thank you.
of the evening.
The next item is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, authorizing the village manager to enter into an agreement with Curry Swords Agia Architects Incorporated for the Community Center Phase 3 project and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Question. Do we know what we think the Phase 3 project is?
Go ahead, you answer.
No, I'm
I did speak to Todd about it, and he did have a full program already written out. He explained to me that this would be taking that program now and giving us a conceptual plan of what that program would look like. So it's moving into the first stages of a design that we can look at and for us to approve in order for them to actually go into full, construction documents.
I personally would like to see some details about what that program is before we move towards signing a contract to design it. We might have some input in that. And I think this is kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit.
Well, if you go to Exhibit A, it identifies what the Phase 1 and Phase 2 is. I think that may be answering your questions.
No, I think what he wants to do is get the actual program of what we want to put in the building, which
exactly
we already have.
Or the public's input.
This is the
Our
plan
input.
Yeah.
to actually
Yes.
build the facility for the program. I don't know what the program is.
Gary, I complained.
So-
Could we bring this back on the next council meeting? That way we can take a look at it now?
Would you give Todd 30 seconds,
All right,
Yes.
please?
And if you can do this in 30 seconds.
20 seconds.
20
We have 4 minutes
I'm
left.
gonna go.
Into a pumpkin.
You're on,
Quick and
go.
simple. We're expanding the size of our wellness center by about 50%. We're creating a theater gym space where the stage can be a room that's operated for activities. It's a stage while the basketball game's going on. And then when the theater production or the music event takes place, it's a multi-purpose gymnasium theater space. And then increasing the size of the pool, increasing the size of our bathrooms greatly, and the quality of the locker rooms greatly.
Moving the pool out
Moving the pool
and adding parking.
and adding underground parking.
So we're actually going to be expanding the building over where the pool is right now.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And building a new pool closer to
Tot lot.
To the park.
park.
Yes, sir. That's
How
exactly
many
the plan.
square feet are we adding?
It's about a 25% increase of the total building, so about 15,000 square feet.
And have we gotten any ballpark estimates as to what that might cost us? I understand you have to design it first, but still, I mean,
Well, the underground parking is
It'll be
definitely
resale.
something that is a very expensive.
That'll be the most
part of it.
expensive element.
You know how I feel about parking. So, I mean, I don't know that we're all going to be on the same page on parking part,
I
but.
don't know how you feel about parking, so.
You don't know? You don't know?
I think at this point, we can't build the building by code without any more parking, so.
well, my
You
point
can't-
is.
you can't what?
If I can finish it, my point is that I would,
It's our code.
I would like to see,
Code.
Todd?
Gary?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to see in a little bit more detail what we're proposing to do and have some kind of a ballpark estimate as to what this whole thing might cost us, so we can decide if we even want to do it before we go spending money to design it.
I need to propose an extension of time. How long do we
I mean,
want?
do you want me to bring back a contract of somebody? I have to work with somebody to get that estimate.
You know, I understand that, and you do, and we've done it before many, many times.
All those in
You can't get
favor?
it down to the
Aye.
penny. You can't get it down to the penny, but you can get a very close estimate
I can get,
by people that do these kind of things.
I can work with our owner's representative or construction representative.
Perfect. He should be able to do
We
it.
have an idea, we got an estimate of what underground parking would be under 530, so, I mean, you're absolutely.
Per space. So can you
But
bring
like
this?
like I said before, we don't necessarily have to do the underground parking.
Well, we can itemize, I'm sure they can itemize that out in the ballpark.
What's that?
They can probably itemize that in the ballpark.
Right,
item.
yeah.
Could you bring this back next council meeting with what we're gonna put in it and a ballpark estimate of what it would be with it itemized on the parking? And we can take a look at it and whether it's for
I
business or not.
think part of the exercise also, though, and I'm sorry for doing this, and just a thought, is knowing what the current programming is and what the programming is in the expansion, because.
Can I speak to that a little bit? I mean, having spent time at the community center, all of these things that he's recommending are all going to be filled immediately. The gym is going to be filled, the pool, people can't, there's constant complaints of the instructors can't.
I don't
meet the
understand why he's
demand.
only going for 25%.
I mean, I just, of these programs are all, there are people waiting to do the programs.
But this is all part of my question.
Okay.
We keep piecing this community center together piece by piece by piece. Let's figure out what we want the thing to be in the long term and then figure out a program to get it done instead of.
Survey? Did you just say a survey?
And it's not even taking into consideration the extra amount of kids that we're going to get once we continue to
Kara, stop having
rebuild
kids.
our homes. You know, when we turn the Mackle homes into McMansions, we add a couple of 2 or 3 kids to every structure. We haven't thought about that. We're just trying to fit the kids that we have now, and the 25% will just do what we have now.
And it's part of the reason that you've limited this building space. I mean, there really is, you were mentioning that we're going to be going out into the park, I think as far as we could reasonably go out.
Probably.
Part of the reason we want to start with the architect is to see what's possible.
But you see, here's the thing.
Yeah.
This is where you end up if you don't do a good job of planning.
Right.
We may need to go out towards the park with the building itself. We may need to put the pool instead of a pump station in 530. We may need to do a lot of things to
Don't
accommodate.
don't go there.
You're kidding. I mean, I'm just using an example of if we don't know.
That example has been talked about, before.
Well, I use that as an example. What I'm trying to say is that we have to figure out what our ultimate need is for this for the next 15 or 20 years, not tomorrow. Figure out how we're going to accommodate it, or maybe that we can accommodate it, and we have to make some alternative plan. But I just don't like this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 8. Right. It just
Okay,
doesn't
so
make any
hopefully
sense.
remember, phase 2 was originally thought of during phase 1 because we couldn't get buy-in to do the whole thing at once. So now, hopefully, phase 3 is the last phase. And if we could allow Todd to work with the architect to try and determine the needs of our community and come back. And I'm assuming that you've done this based on the survey that you already did.
We
Am I
haven't
correct?
need to redo our survey. I thought it was due, right?
It was provided to you,
Yep.
Jenny, what was it, a week ago?
Yeah, I saw it.
But do we want to actually conduct the survey and
I
use
agree
that data?
I agree with Katie on, I mean, these are known items. We did a lot with the first expansion to address, at the time, that we had some serious needs coming from the community to address our adult and senior population. And we've done that, and we've done that successfully. And if you see the level of activity that's taking place in that area, you'd be extremely impressed.
27,000.
To Katie's point, if you see the number of people that are arguing over for swimming lanes, for example, at peak times, and the number of kids that can't participate in programs, and the number of kids that are being turned away from athletic programs and the athletic programs we can't have, and the free time we don't have for our members to use the gym because we have to restrict moderately some of the programming. So I mean, we can do whatever you want at the end of the
I
day. and we can do it
apologize, I need
however you
another
wanna do it.
extension.
I'll move.
I only have one more in me, folks.
Wait, but let me just,
That's it.
Frank, and something that you've raised on several occasions is some of the community programming and some of the expansion, and I don't know, you've always envisioned at the library site.
Yes, I have. I've had.
And I agree.
It's not going to make a difference. We're going to need the space.
Well, for the theater portion of it.
Yes.
The theater portion.
That's only a small part of the use of that,
Yes.
of that particular addition.
The stage itself is 800 square feet.
That's a very small part of
But
it.
that's why it would be very
No, but
easy in the library.
That
and then you
goes
would-
on now that is possibly stuff that would be more aligned with this
The
other
Broadway,
building.
the Broadway.
Like the Broadway, Maria Verdeja, like
Yes.
KB Strings. There is, if we were to build a modern new library with this sort of performance arts center and space in it for those type of pursuits, it's possible we'll be at the same time freeing up space from the community center.
Everything we're designing is multi-purpose. My fear, if you combine the two, it's going to be years till.
Or if one
we
never
make a
gets
decision.
done, then you never have the stuff that you wanted to use it for.
Yeah, everything, even if you look at the rooms that you did in the first expansion, we can turn that around and make that a dance and aerobics room tomorrow if we decided to. We've done everything very multi-purpose, but again, however you'd like to proceed with it.
I just also would like to be able to redirect people and the crowding to another area and promote the walking from the condos. And I mean, it's stuff we've talked about and never properly vetted.
Can we give them some direction?
I think Gary gave direction. I agree with Gary's idea.
Do we need an extension again? Because you had asked for 5 minutes, or was it?
You got a second. You got a second. Gary, you wanted more you kind of wanted more parameters before.
Yeah, I did. I think that we need to analyze not what we need right now, what we're going to need going forward for however many years, and figure out how we're going to incorporate this all into one phase 3 instead of having a phase 4 and 5. Guess what? We've run out of space. We don't have anywhere else to put anything, but we could have done this that way instead. I mean, it's just not good planning. It's not good planning, in my opinion.
What else do we want to accomplish tonight?
I think we want.
You have the fracking thing, we can just.
So what are we telling Todd? To come back
Come
with
back on the
what?
24th with a more specific description of the program and a rough budget.
Okay.
And think about things that we might
Itemized
need
program and
in the future.
evidence-based. Where did you, what's your current
But
capacity?
are you sure 25% is all you need?
I mean, this to me is part of the strategic plan.
He wants like 200%.
No, not
Yeah,
200.
I mean, what I want or what I think is
we need
feasible.
more than 25% of what we have now.
Show us based on
personally.
hours of give us substance.
That's what,
Okay.
Myra, could we, apropos of this, could we,
Yes.
out of order, try to get some consensus on this library letter to move this thing along? Because we will waste another 2 weeks, and I want to get this thing moving if it's possible to do so, and I think it is possible to do so.
I'm beat.
I can receive comments by email.
I'm beat.
It could be. It could be.
Can we do it what?
I need
Let's
another-
just deal specifically with this letter asking for
I want to mail it.
information back. Can we mail that letter?
I don't.
It's basically just asking the county to come back to us because we send something out there and they haven't come back. And if they're not going to come back, then it allows us to go in a different direction.
I totally agree with you. I would just like to strengthen it up a little bit.
How so?
By basically saying, you sat on this for 5 months now, we expect you to respond to this, and if you don't by a certain amount of time, we'll assume that you're not interested in working with us, and we'll go it alone. I mean, you
I think
sort
it
of
does
said
that.
that, but in a way that,
I think part of the delay is ours, though. So I don't know.
maybe.
I know Suarez knows about this. I know the deputy mayor knows about this. I don't think they're opposed to it. And I think if we have that tone, it will be a turnoff.
Okay, well, then let's just get it out the way it is.
Great.
I agree. Just send it out. I can speak.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned. Folks, very quickly, do you suggest we start our next meeting at 6 PM so we can play catch up on discussions?
I'm good with
That
that.
was easy.
Yeah.
Done. That was my discussion item.
Mayor, motion to adjourn.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.